Trem is a village nestled among mountains with fields around it, where neighbors greet each other, cows graze in a field, a woman washes clothes by the river, and a rooster walks in the foreground. A boy strikes the ground with a hoe, sending soil flying, while one man rolls stones into a cart, and another tries to pry out a stump with a beam, and the boy keeps hoeing as a log is dragged past a man in the background. Luca is a 10-year-old boy who starts saying the same thing happens to him every day as he continues to work with the hoe. If they had a tractor, he would work on it, and everything would be much easier because he is a reborn from another world. Although reborn, his memories from before reincarnation are vague. He mainly remembers how comfortable life was in the old world and says this new world has no mechanisms at all. The boy studies his finger and slowly begins to twist it. Instead, this world has magic. The main character twirls a stream of water around his finger. He says, "This world is like a game he played before his rebirth." And in the background, a dragon and magicians appear. After a heavy sigh, he forms a small ball from a jet of water, twists it, and swallows it. Magic lets you create elements like fire and water. In this world, almost everyone can use household magic. The other elements are earth and wind. A bright light surrounds the boy like a barrier, and he says, "We must keep working with the same spirit." This world also has auxiliary magic, like ways to strengthen the body. The main character keeps working hard. People are supporting the boy too. A man pushes a cart carrying something. The sun is setting behind the mountains. The main character says he was born in a rural area and that life here brings many inconveniences. The grandmother drives the pigs back and the woman hangs up the laundry. Still, this is a good, peaceful land. The boy watches the wide plowed fields and the village set against the mountains. Luke's father calls him to come back and walks to meet him. Luke stops working, throws part of his hoe over his shoulder, and looks at his father. The man says Luke is making good progress. The main character asks how his father worked. The father replies he feels great and can't take time off work, and they want to prepare a magical bath at home. As they return from the public fields, a man in the field waves to them while the father and son smile at each other and slowly leave. Villagers smile and wave as they offer a variety of dishes. They walk straight to their house carrying the basket. A father and son return home. A little girl runs toward them, shouting a welcome to her brother and dad. The woman greets her loved ones, Edward and Luke. The man says joyfully that they are home. Luke repeats that he is home. Alice asks her brother if they will wash together today. Lucas says he will prepare hot water. Mom asks if Luke is tired, and he replies that he wants to prepare the bathroom himself, so he will not bother his parents. Mom says everyone washes in the bathroom Luca built. My father says he used to think using that much water was a luxury, but he had grown used to it. My father tells his daughter to go with them, but she refuses. The wife says her husband does not know how to wash other people. Magic controls how much water comes out, and his imagination sets the temperature. In the village, people do not bathe in bathrooms. Most residents just wipe themselves with a damp towel. Luca turns the bathroom dial, and his sister is already running up behind him. Luke still remembered bathing in a past life, so he immediately disliked how the villagers washed. Fed up, the protagonist used earth magic to turn the pantry into a bathroom, and the parents were shocked and could not understand what their son had done. The boy was emotional then and doesn't clearly remember how he did it, but his parents liked it. Alice was especially pleased, and the result turned out well. Alice asks her brother to do everything as usual. He agrees and begins working with the water. Using magic, Luca gathers water and divides it into small parts. He shapes a tiny man from the water and begins to tell how, long ago, Sekitaro was born beneath the crowns of the great tree. He and his sister enjoy watching. Alice watches the waterman and the creatures in the water around her, delight shining in her eyes. Using fairy tales from the main character's past life, he arranges a water puppet show for his sister. Here is the magic Luca invented to make his little sister happy. But doing all this is harder than it seems. Using magic requires mental focus and control, but Luke's long training since childhood and his awareness from birth that he had been reborn in another world help him a great deal. As an infant, his mind was clearer because he had been reborn into a new world, but he cannot remember anything from before his reincarnation. Luca couldn't remember. His head felt like constant white noise, and only one thing was clear. Something bad had happened. Luke now has loving parents who carefully raised him with the help of magic, and after his bath, Sonia dries him while Edward uses wind magic to help their little son dry faster. Tasting magic for the first time in his mother's milk, the main character drank it with relish, trying everything to see if he could use magic as an infant. Luke learned that repeating the same action increased his magical power, and for the first time, he felt his magic drain. In that moment, Luca felt he had sensed the whole world around him and was flying through the sky. Luca looks at his parents with wide eyes as Sonia and Edward cry with joy because the boy almost died at that moment. The village priest arrived in time and through his efforts restored the baby to health. Luca long remembered his parents' relieved, joyful faces that day. Projected magic draws on the main character's inner power, allowing him at least to understand how everything works. Luca can absorb magic from the environment and has learned to use all of it, drawing power from water, earth, and air, and converting it into stronger magic. Reborn into a world of magic, the main character decided he needed to learn to use it to make life easier. His sister admires how he shapes and controls figures made of water. Luke delights his dear sister. Every day he trains to use magic. Their mother suddenly opens the door and they both flinch. She tells them to finish. Mum sets the prepared food on the table. Lucas stirs the drinks in the glasses with her magic, and the family gathers around a table full of delicious food to enjoy a home-cooked meal while the father tells Luke about something. Luke's father tells him that his magical power is vital to life and that using it just to bathe is a luxury. Luke knows he must be careful with the Force, and when his father asks how he is, he says he is fine. Luca asks his father if he's done something wrong, but his father simply says everything is fine and smiles broadly. The family head says his wife is an excellent cook. Alice replies that Mum certainly cooks tastier than Dad. Night has fallen. Luca lies in bed in his room, which has a wardrobe, a bedside table, and a pair of slippers by the bed. He does not expect much from his new life. His sister is already asleep, clutching her favorite plush bunny. Their father sits with his mother, sipping from a mug with a bottle beside him. Luca only wants to live peacefully with his dear family in the future. The sun has risen behind the mountains, and the rooster has already crowed. Alice wakes up and walks slowly to her parents, wishing everyone in the room a good morning while wondering where her brother is. Mum also says good morning to her daughter and replies that Luca is already in the field. Alice is surprised. The father adds that Luca goes there to practice his magic. Edward decided it was time to see what his son was doing. The wife and daughter wish the father good luck. In the field, Luca practices earth magic, arms outstretched as he tries to repeat what he did with the water dolls, picking up soil and shaping it into a doll. The protagonist creates a doll-like figure from several joined parts and uses magic to put it in a fighting pose. The doll is now ready. Puzzled, the father asked whether his son had been using earth magic today. Luca said he was not playing, and that the doll's name was Bon, and that he had made it to look like the classic skeleton used in 3D game models. Luca ordered the doll to work. The doll swings the hoe, and Luca tells his father it will only speed up the work in the field. Luke's father is surprised and thinks his son can already control magic of that size. The doll falls and breaks apart. Luke and his father stand stunned. His father says he still needs to work on his balance. Luke hoped that everything would work out. His father warns him not to be surprised when all the villagers stare at him. The main character's life is mostly about playing with magic in a remote rural area. Luca puts the model's skeleton he dug out of the ground back on its feet, and his father goes to the people who waved and called to him. Traim is a small, remote mountain village of about 200 people with fields where men work. The Margrave, who governs this land, ordered the village built to cultivate a rare magical herb that grows only on special soil and is used as a raw material for magical medicine. A field and the village's houses are visible in the background. Luca's doll is holding a hoe. He wanted to make field work easier for everyone, so he made the doll to do the work. Luca tells me the earthen doll's name is Bon. If the main character controls him, field work becomes much easier. Bon is hoeing while a chicken watches beside it. When Luca asks Linnea for her opinion, she replies enthusiastically that the main character's actions look very cool, and Linnea is Luke's childhood friend, the village head's granddaughter, and like family to him. The girl also knows how to use the bathroom and uses it. Linnea says it reminds her of how Luca plays with Alice. The boy says these are not games, but special training. The doll falls apart, and Luca says it is harder with her. A childhood friend says she wouldn't mind looking at Luke's water dolls, and the boy responds positively and suggests they go to the bathroom together next time, which embarrasses the girl and makes her imagine them sitting together in the bathroom. Embarrassed, the girl runs away, covering her face with both hands and calling her friend's name. Luca rubs his cheek, puzzled, and notices his girlfriend has acted strangely. Luca and the father enter the house, and the father cheerfully tells his loved ones they are back. The woman greets her son and husband, while the girl happily calls her brother to the bathroom right away. Alice's father asked her to go with him today, but she refused. He is outraged, saying it's unfair that she always goes out with Luke. The son told him to listen to himself. Alice is already screaming and crying in the bathroom. At first, Luca is confused why Alice screamed because the doll is right here. The girl waves her hands and says she wants a doll that can be crushed and one that isn't cute anymore. When Alice explains, Luca understands and apologizes. Luca remakes the figurine he once made for Alice, and she says it looks much better now. He realizes the training has made his dolls far more like real people than before. The protagonist also creates a figurine that is far more muscular than the one he made for Alice, and he wonders whether these new dolls are truly unattractive. Luca believes he should change the ball's structure, but adding more parts will make it harder to control, so it's better to find a way to manage all the parts at once, rather than handling each one individually. Luca found a way to make that kind of doll, turned it into a single mechanism so it looked like a little man. And when Alice asked what was wrong with him, he told her not to pay attention to him. Controlling several parts at once suddenly became much easier. Luke's doll began to move quickly. With just a little concentration, everything worked out. This was most likely the result of his diligent training. Alice puffs out her cheeks and says her doll is much cuter. Luke's muscular doll and Alice's doll stand facing each other. Magic still feels mysterious to Luke, and he wants to try asking the priest about it. Mum tells the kids to get out of the tub again, and they do. My father asks how I feel, because using water and earth magic for a whole day is a lot. And he says, magic power is not infinite, so the inhabitants would not spend their power to control an earth and a doll. Mum just learned her son has been playing with dolls. Luca says he isn't playing and wants to do everything he can to make life easier for everyone, not just himself. Mum calls it a good idea, but says they're all very worried about him. Luca thanks you for your concern and says he is really all right and will not die like he did when he was a baby. Shock spreads through the family. Alice begins to cry and says she does not want her brother to die. Mum says, Luca was only joking. The father calls out loudly to his son. Then Luca finally realizes what he said a minute earlier. A tense scene unfolds as the mother comforts their still-crying daughter in her arms and looks at her son with bitterness, while the father seems angry but is very worried about his only son. The father says they cannot talk about death, even as a joke. Luca apologizes, and the father tousles his hair and says it's time for him and his sister to go to bed. Alice lies beside her brother, crying that she will only sleep with him. Luca apologizes and promises everything will be fine. The family head admits he worries too much. His wife worries about their child too. My parents said Luca was special to them. Luca and his father are already gathered, waving toward the fields. My father has a hoe slung over his shoulder. Luca carries a small package that seems to contain food. Sonia and Alice are with Luca and Edward. Many workers are already in the fields. They also wave to Luke and his father, greeting them. His father tells his son they should try hard today. The son wishes his father good luck. Today, the main character will try to make the same doll as the water one. Luke builds a much larger replica of the doll he made in the bathroom from a different material, and the doll swings powerfully, striking the ground with a hoe so small pieces of earth scatter in all directions. The doll keeps making fast, forceful strokes on the ground. Luca thinks it's very powerful and effective, but Alice would definitely cry if she saw it, and he controls the doll he made with just one hand. Luke's gaze is fixed on the fenced-off forest, its massive trees blocking the view. He still senses something approaching the village. The doll keeps working hard. The main character decides to use wind magic to make a loud sound. The men look around and realize it is an alarm. Luca's father runs up, and Luca quickly tells him to look toward the forest. In a world of magic, there are monsters. A man says they are magical forest wolves. You can see 5 of them now, but more might arrive soon. They are aggressive and about to attack. Stunned that they escaped in broad daylight, the man warns the others about the monsters and tells Luke to run to the priest and tell him to evacuate all the villagers, and Luke, worried about his father, still joins the others to fight. Luke's father orders the archers to stop the monsters from entering the fence and to use earth magic to throw stones at them. All the men respond positively to Edward. Despite Lucas's insistence on helping fight the monsters, his father sends him to the village, and he wants to object, but has no time. The boy's father says, children must obey adults. The main character stares at his father, dumbfounded. Smiling gently, he tells his son that a father's duty is to protect his family by any means, so for now, he trusts Luca to look after Alice and Mum. Claiming that no forest wolves can defeat him, the man laughs contentedly. Luca just smiles in agreement, and before leaving, he still chooses to help them, while the father can only ask, surprised by what his son is doing. Archers had already grabbed their bows and were rushing into battle. One man ran to Captain Ed and told him there were not enough arrows. Luke's father said everything had already been taken care of, and the arrows were ready. At that time, Luke ran to the village to find the priest. Roger sees a huge pile of arrows in front of him, clearly more than enough for all the archers to kill every monster, and he is stunned by how many there are. Roger says there are clearly at least 1,000 arrows here. Captain Ed says he is sometimes amazed by his son's strength. Roger is even more surprised that Luca did it. Edward tells Roger to hand out arrows to everyone and stop calling him Captain. Roger understands what Luke's father is asking and now calls him by his first name. Luke bursts into the church, which has a beautiful tree-shaped mosaic and a huge bell. The boy shouts that trouble has come and that mages have broken into the church, and the Holy Father asks Luke to clarify what he meant by megastars. The main character announces that his father and the others have decided to take up the fight. The grandparents sitting nearby are shocked and horrified and say they can help too. We must inform the head man. The Holy Father reassures everyone that everything is fine and there is no need to panic. Luke says his father told him to start evacuating the residents. The priest says he wants to see the situation for himself first. They are coming out of the church. The priest uses magic to survey the battlefield and says Edward and the others have the advantage, surprising Luca because the priest can see from so far away, and he explains it is a type of body-enhancing magic. Edward stands with a sword, and the others have their bowstrings drawn, ready for battle. The monsters are poised too, bearing sharp fangs and about to pounce. At the front, Luke's father points his sword at the wolves. The archers loosen their fully drawn bows, sending arrows and stones toward the wolves in the forest. Arrows and stones struck true, and the wolves were defeated. People rejoice, raising bows and swords to mark their victory over the Magsberry. The Holy Father says the many arrows repelled the monster's attack. Luca is glad his arrows were used against the monsters. The Holy Father wonders whether he himself had made so many. Luca says he did not know how many were needed, and so made many, and the Holy Father reflects on Luca's actions. The Holy Father says what Luke did was amazing, and asks him to stop by because he wants to talk about important matters. Luke says he will come. The monsters have been defeated. The grandfather at the church says he only wanted to help with the rescue. Luca notices his father and his friend behind him. They are walking straight toward him, smiling. Luca says, "They did a good job." My father laughs and says it was a piece of cake. Roger says the arrows Luca made helped them all a lot. The men greet Linael's father, and the Holy Father offers help, but they say this battle was easier than working in the field. The men in the field have already begun handling the bodies. They will collect the skins and fangs, and the meat is edible too, so it will be shared by everyone. Luke's father and Roger came to report to the Holy Father and invite him to the field with them. The Holy Father agrees. Luke asks what he should do next. His father says the work is finished for today, so he can go home to rest and tell his mother everything. Luke sees the men off, waving to them as they wave back. The men sit in a semicircle. Roger says there was nothing like this in the forest before, and then the monsters came out in the middle of the day. Headman Toaston says the magical power attracts the beasts. The Holy Father says they sense strength at an instinctive level. Roger asks whether they are really after an herb with magical power. The Holy Father says that if they were herbivorous monsters, everything would be clear, but they are predators, so they must be drawn to something else. The Holy Father suggests they may have been drawn by Luke, and that the boy has an enormous reserve of magical power. It is also worth noting the amount and quality of that power, and considering all this, onions make very tasty food for wild animals. Angrily demanding food, Luke's father rushes forward, grabs the Holy Father by the collar, and leaves the men behind, shocked. Roger calls out his rank, and the headman calls Edward a youngster and tells him to be quiet. Calm down. The Holy Father apologizes, saying he chose his words poorly. Luke's father grits his teeth and trembles with anger too. Coming down, the man apologizes, says he lost his temper, and looks at Edward with concern. When Roger and the head man speak to him, he asks them to stop and says everything is different from when he was on his father's land. Back at home, Luca tells his mother what happened on the field, and his mother and sister listen to Luke with surprised faces, while Luke's father sits there still puzzled, believing protecting the village and his family is now his most important duty. Lucas says he's at home. His mother finds him holding a broom and wants to ask something but doesn't have time. The main character begins to say that the monsters' corpses have not yet been fully sorted, so they were released earlier than usual. The son asks his mother where Alice is. The mother says Alice is asleep and that Lenille came by, helped around the house, and played with her. Luca asks where Alice is now. The mother says she is washing in the bathroom. The main character opens the bathroom door with a creak and finds Linnaeal inside. Linnaeal blushes as he says he remembers her wanting to see the water dolls and will show her everything. Her confused cry fills the whole house. Mum scolds Luke, saying he cannot go into the girls' bathroom without permission. Luke says he understands and will knock before entering. The girl says it is fine and that she did not expect it. Mum apologizes, calls her son a fool, and the girl understands. Lenille thanks Luca for yesterday and says her dad told her how much Luca helped defeat the monsters. Luca says he did nothing and that it was over while he was walking to the church. When the conversation turned to the church, the main character suddenly remembered that the Holy Father had asked him to come in. Luke arrives at the church. The sky is clear outside. Inside, the Holy Father greets him at once, and a girl beside the Holy Father smiles sweetly and greets Luke too. The boy greets the Holy Father and the sister. The Holy Father thanks Luke for the pair she promised him. The protagonist admits he forgot his promise and harmed Linnaeal. The nun beside the Holy Father looks surprised. Luca suddenly starts to feel strange and admits he has always been forgetful, saying something is clearly wrong and must be fixed, and he does not understand what is happening, while his father and sister remain wary as he screams through clenched teeth. The Holy Father sits beside Luke, takes his hand, and rests his other hand on Luke's shoulder, saying everything is fine. Luke feels very warm and starts to calm down. Luke feels at peace with the Holy Father's magic. Thinking of his father, he says he felt strange. The father says, children are sensitive to this kind of thing, and the main thing is to stay calm. Luke turns his attention to his sister. Sister Ulrika is stunned and deeply depressed, tears running down her cheeks, and she did not expect this. The Holy Father is calling Sister Ulrika. Apologizing, she hurries away and says she needs a short break. When the main character asks his father what happened to his sister, the Holy Father replies that she is very sensitive, not a child, but a different case, and that she grew more tearful as she got older. Luke decided to ask the Holy Father why he had called him in the first place. His father says he called him because of his amazing magical powers. The boy does not understand what the man meant. The Holy Father says the magic coming from his body is so powerful it draws evil creatures from beyond the barrier. Luke began to understand what the priest was trying to tell him. Lucas claims the monsters from yesterday came for him because of his magic. The Holy Father says he cannot be 100% certain of that. The priest says there's nothing wrong, and that he decided Luke needed to learn to hold magical power in his body, and Luca has perfectly learned to keep the magic in his own body. Luke thanks his father. The Holy Father says he never released his magic outwardly and only used it when necessary. Self-study has limits too. Luca has had special training since childhood. The Holy Father radiates power and Luke stands frozen before him, mesmerized by the sight unfolding. Luke realizes he is still far from the Holy Father's magic and says the Father hid that amazing power, while the Father says he is far from the main character's strength. Seeing that Luca could perceive his magic, the Holy Father takes this as proof he has no sensory problems, wants to teach him how to conceal his power, and Luca thanks him. The Holy Father says a magical power lives in the body of every creature. That power is used to make different kinds of spells. When he folds his arms, a thread of fire appears around him. Father explains that to avoid draining its magic, the bow can absorb and mix magic from the environment. Luca thinks about the absorption and mixing, and begins to suspect that everything he has learned since childhood was a mistake. Luke is a baby and did not know the names of the New World's techniques, so he decided to invent names for them himself. Chakra is where magical power gathers. The cycle uses magical power from outside. Magical oscillation is using magic itself. The names on his title in this world showed chakra meant compression, circulation meant absorption of magical power, and magical fluctuations meant mixing, making Luke feel uneasy as he clutched his head. The Holy Father says the technique is simple. The bow should cloak most of its magic with an invisible membrane made from a small amount of magic, so no one will see the hidden power. This is the cover-up. The priest sees Luke looks pale and asks if he is all right. Lucas says everything is fine and that he understands what a cover-up is. The father tells Luke that since he understands concealment, he should try it right now. Luca is unsure but agrees. Luke gathers his power around himself and now resembles the Holy Father when he performed the concealment. While the man appraises the main character, Ly, his expression showing he is pleased with how Luke conceals. Touching his chin, the Holy Father said Luke was good at staying hidden. Luca thanked his father and said he would keep training. He said goodbye to the man and ran toward the house. The man told him to take care of himself. The Holy Father wonders what happened to Luke, since he seemed very depressed. The priest approaches the wooden door with iron trim and opens it, and though it swings open easily, you can still hear it creak. You open the door in front of the man and see a large tree with a thick trunk, flowers around its base, and sunlight falling directly on it. Then someone asks if Luca has gone home, and the man says Luca has left before turning to Vulcan. The man explains the girl is a priestess and asks why she began crying. The priestess says Luca was hurt and it made her very sad, and she insists it is not the child's fault. The Holy Father watches wearily. Even this sacred tree cannot protect him, the priestess says as she lays her hand on its trunk. The father also looks up at the tree's crown. Welkin says this great sacred tree protects the land around it and anchors its roots in the same soil. The girl says the tree was meant to protect him and hide all his magic. The Holy Father adds that the barrier alone could not hide Luke's magic forever. My father thinks Luke has an enormous store of magic, but the priestess says it is not the amount that matters. It is the nature of it, and it is no longer just quality, but pristine purity. The priestess says the bow was blocked by a barrier, but its light could not be extinguished and the monsters found it. Father says it is not the priestess's fault. She calms herself and is grateful her father taught her how to hide, which will keep her safer. Removing her headdress, she revealed elf ears and said she and the Holy Father would protect the tree, and that the village lives in peace thanks to their efforts. Welkin says she is half elf, so she is very young and still has a lot to learn. The Holy Father replies that if she is young, he is a baby by comparison. The elf-eared girl asks whether the Holy Father really called her an old woman, smiling sweetly as the father is caught off guard and taken aback by a question from the priestess and begins to explain he did not mean it at all. The priestess says everything is fine, and the elves are proud of their age, likening her people to slow-growing trees and seeing that as an advantage. Sister Wilkin explains that although they appear young, they are old for humans and only seedlings compared to other elves. According to the girl, the high elves are the elves' ancestors, and they look even younger, hardly aging as they grow older. The priestess warned that if the Holy Father ever meets the high elves, he must not laugh at their appearance, or he will be killed on the spot. Holy Father, I was glad to take note of this. The girl says others deserve thanks too. The Holy Father looks puzzled, and she reminds everyone not to forget the man who found the sacred tree here and begged the elves to send a priestess to this land. The priestess smiles and says the village would not exist at all without this man. And the Holy Father agrees, thanking everyone, especially the sacred tree, the priestess, and the Margrave. Luca lies in a huge clearing, thinking it is natural in the world of magic that every spell already has its own name. He behaved like a foolish teenager and is very ashamed. Luca rolls on the ground, clutching his head. Luca sits down and immediately uses compression, absorption, and mixing, shouting that this is necessary. A strong, bright glow appears, and at the very end, to keep the monsters from seeing anything, the main character uses concealment. After the main character cast every spell, a round object appeared. Luca was puzzled, and when he cast all the spells at once on Luke, a strange round stone formed on the outskirts. Relieved, the main character exhales, glad he at least managed to vent his emotions and feel a little better. The boy says it's getting late and time to go home and leaves the stone he created on the ground. Luke's mother greets him and he admits he's late, saying he went to church and learned a lot about magic, and his father asks him to show what he learned, but notices he is too tired. And his mother adds that Alice was waiting for him to go to the bathroom. The boy says he's too tired today, so Alice will get to play with the dolls more than during their usual bathroom routines, and the girl sighs sadly as their parents smile at their friendly children. The wife asks what happened to their son. The husband explains the spell is called concealment. He adds that the spell keeps their dear son under reliable protection. Outside, a rooster crows, and the sun lights everything with its bright rays. The wife sits smiling as she slices an apple, and the husband looks straight ahead with interest, pursing his lips and rubbing his chin with one leg thrown over a chair. Luke says the Holy Father actively taught him concealment yesterday, but he is not sure how well he can do it. While explaining, he opened his mouth slightly and reached one hand forward. My father says that if someone stands 20 paces beyond him, no man of his level will notice. Luke asks for clarification about the 20 paces and doubts it is so surprising, and the man insists it is remarkable and admits he would not notice either. The main character says he wants to try another way to hide his magical power, and my father looks at me in surprise, unsure what other method could hide it. Lucas says he discovered something new when he felt disappointed in himself. Create a space before surrounding yourself with a shell of magical power. A slight flush of anticipation colors his cheeks. After creating the space, the main character transferred all its magic into his body, then formed a shell over the now powerless space, creating a bright shell around the bow. The concealment the Holy Father taught Luke hides magical power in a single shell, while Luke's method forms two shells at once, and his only concern is whether he will succeed. Both parents stare at their son in horror, mouths open. My father fell from his chair onto the floor, and his slipper flew off. The mother set down the sliced apple and raised a hand to her mouth in shock. Luca watches to see if they like his hiding, which he has perfected. The father says his son is not here. The mother asks whether her son is okay. Luca says he is fine and waves his hands. The mother, father, and Luke look surprised when a loud scream fills the house. Tears in her eyes, Alice runs to her brother. Luca, not understanding what happened, holds out his hands to his younger sister. The girl says she does not want her brother to disappear. Luca reassures her that everything is fine and that he is here and will not disappear. The father says his son's concealment was so thorough that the mother thought he had disappeared. The mother tells her son not to use such powerful concealment without a clear reason. Luca replies he will only use concealment for a special reason. Luca discovers Alice can sense his magic from afar, and when their father asks Alice if she knows where Luca is, she replies she always does. Alice comes downstairs and points to where she feels Luke is when he is not at home, saying he is always there when he wakes, and points with his finger, and the rest of the family looks surprised to see the house so clearly. The father is stunned that his daughter can sense her brother from so far away. With hills in the background, a lonely house on the mountaintop reached by a path, and fields and mountains beyond. Edward is surprised that Alice can feel her brother's magic so strongly, even when he is in the fields, and Lucas says it's great for his sister. The father laughs and says she is his daughter with Sonia. Mum laughs contentedly and confirms. Lucas says he will hide his magic power so very bad animals will not find him, and the sister asks again about hiding it. Luke starts using concealment, but this option is a bit simpler than the previous one, especially for Alice. And when his power can't be felt at all, Alice says it's okay, because that's how she can feel her brother. Luke asks if he is really that bad at hiding. Taken aback, the father told his son he was a great fellow. Mum covers her mouth in surprise and says Alice just feels his magic power too strongly. Alice smiles, her cheeks flushed, and says she loves him very much. Luca replies that he understands everything and thanks Alice while stroking her head. Pride fills the father because his children have grown very smart. His gaze shows happiness, and he believes his own father would be proud of the grandchildren. Someone in their house says everyone should go to breakfast, and after a pleasant meal, the father and son will go to work in the fields. Luke's father is taken back to the past. The men behind a barrel with an appetizer in a bottle ask whether he is really carrying flowers to his beloved. The man with the bouquet smiles and says he actually forbade them to drink in the city center. They say they cannot meet Margareby's son in the city. Then they laugh, call him a fool, and say they already know he is just a concubine's child, a commoner like them. The men shout that he keeps saying he's educated. They urge him to marry his girlfriend sooner, or the booze will sit unused for a special occasion. He waves them off and keeps thinking it's time to get married. He remembers his past. Black silhouettes with mocking faces whispered that he was just a concubine's child and that his mother had died in childbirth. His father told him not to worry about what others were saying behind his back because he was his son. Ed replied that he understood and would ignore it. Edward is small, wrapped in a blanket, lying alone in his bed and thinking about why his mother died and left him alone. The young man keeps walking with a bouquet in his hands, oblivious to everyone and everything around him, and he thinks about starting a family. Snapping back to reality on the street, he hears a familiar voice shouting for someone to stop what they're doing. A man holds a girl tightly, calls her name, and tells her it's all right. She asks to be let go. He promises to love and cherish her. Sanetka refuses, saying she already has someone she loves. Ed flies up and punches the man hard in the face, sending him flying back. Sonia flies away in tears and calls Edward. The man is furious but understands he must protect his girlfriend. Edward takes a defensive position as three guards point swords at him. Sonia calls out to him, and the man who was hit starts arguing about how the other dared to hit him and who he thinks he is here. Edward frowns at the man, and Sonia tells him to stop because he does not know who that person is, while a huge, beautiful building like a church stands nearby with a tree visible at its center. A burly man, apparently the injured young man's father, says that even though the youth is the Margrave's son, he wants him punished harshly, and the son sits beside him with his legs crossed and part of his face bandaged. Edward believes this man will become the next head of the Viscount's family and sits with his father, hands clasped and head bowed, as the father asks you to consider that his son is truly sorry for what he did. The father says his son will be discharged from the army and sent to the Forbidden Borderlands to help develop them, and all income from there will be used to pay compensation. Edward remains, sitting silently beside his father. Edward will not be allowed to leave until the compensation is paid. The conversation continues and reveals that the Forbidden Lands are a dangerous place inhabited only by elves and dragons. The person who was hit enjoys all of it very much. The old bearded man, apparently the church's priest, says that under the law of the God of the Covenant, compensation must be paid, and they will bind Edward with a contract spell so he cannot leave the Forbidden Lands until he has paid it all. Edward's father sits before the man's family and his son and looks at his son, who stands before the priest, while the Holy Father stands behind the pedestal and asks if Edward agrees, and Edward says he does, placing his hand on his chest. The man who was hit clenches his fist and says this is far too little to atone for the guilt before him, while the father, behind him, stands stunned, reaching out to stop his son, but unable to do so. The young man says compensation must be paid in goods from the Forbidden Lands, and that tax evasion should carry the death penalty. The father tells his son he is an idiot. The priest turns to the Margrave, who agrees. The Margrave was visibly angry and said the Viscount should go ahead if he really thought it necessary. The man looked shocked and tried to speak, but his son would not let him. The Viscount's son said that everything was settled then. Everyone stood on opposite sides of Edward, and the Holy Father began to say that in the name of the God of the Covenant, a contractual spell would from now on be cast on Edward. A ray of light fell on Edward and lit the entire room of the large house with a balcony. Inside the house, Edward's father sits and says that his son has, of course, done things, raises a finger and asks Tausten to bring alcohol, and Tausten steps forward with a bottle on a tray and hands it to the gentleman. Edward sits across from his father with a guilty expression, genuinely sorry for everything that happened today, and apologizes to his father. My father chuckled, but he still praises his son for trying to protect the woman he likely loves with all his heart. Edward warns it is foolish to try to master the Forbidden Lands where elves and dragons live, and he asks whether my father has heard what people say about elves, and my father says the saying is that angering a half-elf does nothing, but angering an elf will make the country disappear. The father warns that angering the high elf will make genocide inevitable, and Edward grows visibly nervous and says elves are extremely dangerous to humans. Edward's father, holding a glass of alcohol, turns and asks Ulrika if this is true, and the girl says it is mostly true. Edward sits stunned, his eyes wide with surprise. The girl says she's glad to meet Edward and that she's a half-elf named Ulrika, adding that she's not as vindictive as the elves, so the young man does not have to worry. Edward turns to the girl and says it is a great honor to meet Mrs. Half-Elf. His father says he called her and sips from his glass. The butler remains behind him, watching Edward and the girl. The man also says a sacred tree has been found on his new land. Edward is surprised and thinks this branch of the world tree may be the one that protects the whole world. The half-elf says Mr. Christoffel asked them to send a priestess who can connect with the sacred tree. Edward's father says Dorica is here to become a priestess, and that with her power, they can easily pay all the compensation. My father says a lot of magic power grass grows there, and that selling it will quickly cover all the compensation. Edward, surprised, realizes everything went according to his father's plan. The man laughs and says it is not for nothing that he is the Margrave. The Margrave declares that the fool in the Viscount's family was far more ignorant about the death penalty than he had expected. Margrave says this man still does not understand the consequences of today's actions and brazen statements. He lifts a glass of alcohol to his lips as the butler stands behind him with a serious look. Father says Toshden and their best farmers will go with Ulrika to turn the forbidden land into Richland. His son thanks him for that. Edward brings up Sonia, and the father wants to know what his son will do. Edward thinks it might be best to break up with her and worries they may never see each other again. His father suggests that Edward tell his beloved this in person, and Edward, confused, looks at the door in surprise. Ulrika points with her palm at the girl who just entered, who already looks rather sad. Edward calls out his beloved's name. Sonia only says her beloved's name sadly, pressing her fist to her chest. The girl apologizes, saying it all happened because of her. Edward claims it's his fault and tells her not to worry, saying he would leave and she would have to stay here. Sonia rushes into her beloved's arms and shouts that she will go with him too, and Edward calls her name and manages to catch her. To be happy, she says she must always be with Edward. Tears roll down her cheeks as she looks straight into her lover's eyes. He gazes at his beloved with warmth. She says she will always be with Edward. He says he also deeply wants the same thing she does. The Margrave tells Toshden they must settle one more matter before leaving for the Forbidden Lands. Toshden agrees, placing his hand over his chest and covering one eye. In the church, a man asks Edward, in a suit, and Sonia, in a wedding dress, to vow that in sickness and in health, even in forbidden lands, they will love and help each other. They respond together with approval. Sanya cries with joy as Edward stands beside his wife, smiling contentedly. The guests raise their mugs for them. Edward's father reacts approvingly and wipes away tears, and Ulrika is happy for the young. You see the house where the whole family lives now. A year has passed since Edward and the others left. Edward rushes into the house, breathless and calling his wife's name. The young mother is already sitting in a room with a priestess, while an old woman holds a bundled baby in her arms, and she tells her husband they have a baby boy as the child begins to cry loudly. The whole room is happy for Edward and Sonia. One man wipes away a tear, calls Sonia a great help, and thanks her. Sonia offers to hold his son, while an old woman with a priestess smile watches sweetly. The man smiles, lifts the child into his arms, and says his son is a fine fellow. Edward cradles the baby carefully in his large hands. Sonia watches the scene and laughs contentedly. Edward notices the child has black hair, while his own hair is golden and Sonia's is brown. The child looks at his father with fascination. Grandma smiles and says it is very rare for children to be born unlike their parents. The priestess looks intimidating and asks sharply whether Edward suspects his wife of cheating. Edward staggers back a little and says he doesn't suspect his beloved of anything like that. Lifting the child with both hands, the man announces the child will be named Luca, while his wife smiles contentedly, still in bed. This is the house they are in now, and will live in with the whole family. And Edward says they are his dear family now. Edward ploughs the field with the other men. They rush up to him and use the old form of address at first, then quickly correct themselves to the headman. Edward starts to turn, but stops, and when the headman says, "Luke's life is in danger," Edward is shocked. The Holy Father says, "Luke may die now because he used only his inner magic." A loud voice comes from the house, and it's Edward asking what the Holy Father meant by everything he said. The priest warns that if nothing is done, their newborn son will die. Edward asks how Luca can be cured. Sonia holds her head in both hands, unable to believe it. The man explains that the combined magic of both parents can awaken the child's own power. Sonia and Edward clarify their powers, and the Holy Father agrees that the child will then wake up. Edward and Sonia sit on opposite sides of Luke and start transferring magical power, and Edward tells Luke to hold on because he is ready to give Luke all the magic he has. But the man says Luke is his family, his son, and he will not give him up even to God. Luke's parents cry with relief and joy as their son has survived and opened his eyes, staring straight at them. Edward says that whatever happens, Dad will be able to protect him. The whole village lies stretched out as if in the palm of your hand. Luca has grown up a lot. Raising both hands, he tells Mum and Dad that it is time for him to leave, and he looks very calm. Both parents waved to their son. Luca says good morning to Lena Yell while holding a small bag. The girl also says good morning to Luke while holding a small bag. Sonia says Toaston's granddaughter and Roger's daughter are friends with their son. The girl's mother died, so Roger brought her with him to the village. The woman says Luke's condition still seems strange. Edward is surprised and asks if Sonia is referring to what happened in infancy. Edward's wife says they are not, because they already figured out what happened then. Helping out in the field, Luke is said to mumble feverishly and treat magic like a brutal workout. And while he furiously works the instrument, he mutters that this is his best life in the new world. Sonia covers her face and starts to cry because their son, unlike the other children, never smiles. Edward stares at his wife, dumbfounded at first and not understanding what happened. Luke's mother repeats that their son isn't smiling. Luke stares blankly, believing that having a family meant everything was fine. Edward didn't even notice this in his son. He hugs his wife to calm down a little. Edward and Sonia bring their son before the Holy Father and the priestess, where a sacred tree stands inside. And a woman greets Luke, introduces herself as Sister Ulrika, and he greets her by name while his parents stand behind him. Luke wonders whether this is the sacred tree and calls it very beautiful. The boy keeps his eyes on the tree's crown. We punch a hole in the small ball in our hand, say it is a sweet made from the sacred tree's honey, and give it to Luca to taste. Luca tastes the honey and says it is sweet. The priest laughs and asks Luca to show her all his magical powers. The priestess looks stunned and says there are no problems, that Luca and his mother can safely go home while his father should stay here for now. Sonia thanks her. They see Luca and his mother off, and Edward wonders why he is the only one left. The Holy Father is stunned when the priestess pounces on Luke's father with lightning speed, knocking her headdress off and grabbing him by the throat, leaving him no time to come to his senses or speak. Ulrika asks why the bow carries contract magic. This contract is not imposed by God's power, but is the devil's own pact. Edward clenches his teeth as he tries to ask what Ulrika's sister means. Edward does not know where the devil's contract on the bow came from. He insists he would never do this to his beloved family or to his own son. The priestess still holds Luke's father by the throat. The Holy Father addresses the priestess. The priestess lets the man go and apologizes, saying Edward really is not that kind of person. Edward replies that everything is fine and he is glad they came to an understanding. Behind the priestess, Ulrika stands beside the Holy Father. He asks what the priestess meant by the devil's contract, and she says she felt something inside him. A negative force is tied to a magical one. The priestess says that when the onion ran out of its supply, a crack opened where the negative force could get in, and the Holy Father said Luke had completely used up his magic and his childhood. Edward says they cured him with his magic and his wife's help, and the man screams loudly as he begins to realize what happened. Edward sinks into a stupor when he learns the contract magic is on him, and that what happened to Luca is his fault. The priest says it is now clear that the power of contract magic entered Luke when he transferred his magic to his son, and the Holy Father says this is how the magical force established the contract. Edward can't shake the idea that everything happening to Lucas is his fault, and even keeps an old excerpt showing the Viscount's son discussing the death penalty for breach of contract. The Holy Father wonders whether the priestess can heal him, and Ulrika replies that she will not succeed and may even harm him, with Luke's life possibly at risk, while Edward asks what to do and the priestess tells him to watch. The priestess says that once Edward fulfills his contract by paying all compensation for products from this forbidden land, Luke's contract may disappear completely. Ulrika's sister says it's better than trying to cancel the contract by yourself. Luke is better off now that his father, like his family, is looking out for him. Edward looks serious. The priestess promises to do everything she can to help him. Edward bows his head and thanks Ulrika sincerely. It looks like Edward, Sonia, and Luca are heading for a picnic. Sonia is wearing a hat, and the man carries a huge backpack packed with various items. My father thinks everything will be fine. Luca and Edward go fishing together. Edward helps his son pull the fish out of the water. The man thinks he will be there to protect his son. Edward holds the reins, sitting on a horse with a slightly frightened Luca in front of him. The father says that as long as he is with Luca, everything will be fine. His father wants Luke to forget forever anyone who will squint at him during his life. Luke is Edward's dear, beloved son. The whole family sits under a tree, eating cooked sandwiches. Mum chews, smiles, and looks at the onions. The father pats the boy on the head, and the son looks at his father. Everyone is home again. Luke calls his father, and he goes. Smiling at her beloved family, Sonia announces it's a girl. She holds the baby as the girl begins to cry loudly. Luca stares at the child in surprise. Edward shouts that the girl's name will be Alice. A priestess and a grandmother in the room smile happily. Edward helps Luke pick up Alice, now his little younger sister. The boy rocks Alice and sings to her until she falls asleep. Alice has grown up, and Luca is playing with her toys. Luke's sister has grown a bit more, and he is already holding her hand as they walk on the grass outside. Edward and Sonia are very happy to watch it all. Luca finally smiles as he shapes water into figures with his magic while sitting on the ground with his legs folded beneath him. And Alice is happy too, smiling as she reaches out to the water figures. Edward thanks Sonia. The wife looks at her husband with tears in her eyes. Edward also thanks his daughter and son. They are his children, even though he is bound by contract magic. Tears fall from the man's face to the floor. Edward has a family and is overjoyed. He hugs them and smiles. Sonia holds Alice and leans against her husband. Luca puts his hand on his father's chest and looks at him. The whole family is truly happy. Now, the men on the ground look up at Luke and his dolls with puzzled faces. Luke says his daily training paid off, and he can now control 3 dolls he created at once. Luke beeps while he's working. The protagonist says he uses wind magic to send sound commands. In the future, he thinks composing a full melody will be possible. Edward says he understands Luke likes practicing magic and scratches the back of his head. Despite it all, the man shouts that everything is unbearably noisy. Luca flinches at his father's words, and Luke's dolls copy his frightened pose. The man behind Edward smiles nervously. Luke's father says wind magic is only for emergency signals, and that using it only needlessly scares people. Luke apologizes to his father. Edward says the apology should be to all the residents standing here now. Luca apologizes to the men present, and they smile and forgive him. Luke's father notices his son learned so much about magic on his own. Luke is clearly an exceptional son. Edward realizes it is time for Luke to take up magic. Inside the church, the Holy Father thanks everyone for joining today. They will talk about one of the most important parts of their lives. He stands behind the pedestal with Sister Ulrika at his side. Sonia sits smiling as she watches Luke, Alice, and Lionel react. They all share the same bench. Magic is the most important part of life for the people of this village and of the whole world. Luke looks at his father and the priestess in surprise. A boy in the front row says he can use magic without lessons. The Holy Father says magic can be used with little training. Everyone present listens closely to the Holy Father. The Holy Father asks what kind of magic Aiden knows. The boy says everyday magic is the easiest and immediately shows it. Aiden's father suddenly hits him because the boy burned him. The man asks what his stupid child is doing. The priest explains that everyday magic is called that because it cannot replace ordinary life. Its official name is creation magic. It has 4 main attributes: water, fire, earth, and air. Anyone can use them. Luca rests his index finger on his chin, and his younger sister copies him. The main character realizes that in making dolls from water and earth, he was using the magic of everyday life. The Holy Father says there were other kinds of magic as well. The Holy Father reaches out for Adam's hand. Father Adina looks at the Holy Father, slightly shocked. Life magic can heal wounds. It affects everyone except the caster. The Holy Father showed Adam this by healing the boy's burned fingers, which Adam had burned, apparently, from the magic of everyday life. It did not thank the Holy Father and says that he no longer has any pain. Luca thinks about it, folding his fingers on his chin, and concludes that even magic has subtypes. The Holy Father says the God of life also holds the magic of life. Then he farts and says it's all too simple, and everyone present laughs and looks at him. My father says it's time to go into more detail about other kinds of magic, and that everyone here should study amplification. People in the room look at the Holy Father with thoughtful faces. Aiden keeps shouting about the gain, saying he knows how to use it. His father insists it is not an enhancement, contrary to what his son believes. Aiden does not understand what his father means and reacts with surprise. The Holy Father said that unfortunately, the boy had only increased his own mana. Adon thinks the Holy Father is probably joking. Wanting to be cool, Adon asks his father what he needs to do for this. The Holy Father says Adin must train to become cool, and then one day a click will run through his whole body called removing magical restrictions or learning new skills. Luke understands his father's point and realizes he managed to combine the dolls he made at the start, which sparked a new skill, describing a doll made of separate parts and one where all the parts have become a single whole. Luke still does not understand what the Holy Father means by acquiring skills, and he begins to pass gas while Leniel watches him with interest as he stares off to the side. Luca thought it sounded like the name of the games from his past life. By then, Alice had fallen asleep in her mother's arms, and her mother watched Luke with some surprise. The Holy Father asks everyone present to say if anyone knows about the magic that grants strength and the god who possesses it. Aiden guessed that magic is called amplification magic and that God is called that too. But his father says he was wrong while Luke sits with a thoughtful face, seriously considering the Holy Father's question. Sonia holds her sleeping daughter, Alice. Luca looks at Renale in surprise as she raises her hand and says, "It is the magic of power and the god of power." The father replies that this is true. Luca finds it amazing, and the girl looks embarrassed. Building physical strength and sharpening reaction time are crucial. Only one country uses terms like ki and aura to describe the magic of power. The Holy Father talks about the magic of creation, of life, of power, and of many other kinds of magic. His sister still stands behind him. Everyone listens attentively. My father keeps saying there is so much magic left that it exists only in books and legends. This describes the magic of creation. She can control everything in the world. The magician controls the bird by pointing a staff at it while holding a book in his other hand. The Holy Father teaches that in addition to the 4 basic attributes, there are also attributes of light and darkness. Each of these aligns with one of the existing attributes. The attributes include water, fire, air, earth, darkness, and light. Many methods can determine an attribute, including spells, magic circles, and other techniques. The Holy Father says the magic of creation can be called witchcraft, and that the Creator God controls it. The priest insists the magic of creation requires nothing and operates only through the imagination of the person who chooses to use it. The Holy Father says that people who already know how to use magic see how convenient it is. Luke reflects on how his magic turns his thoughts into reality and whether that makes it the magic of creation, remembering his many water dolls and mud workers. Adan rubs the back of his head and asks the Holy Father to explain the difference between the magic of everyday life and the magic of creation, since both can produce fire and water. The Holy Father praised Adan for asking such a good and necessary question. The Father says the God of creation is behind creation's wonders, and his gifts make people's lives much easier. A force that can create the 4 basic elements: fire, water, earth, and air. But many people confuse this creative magic with the everyday magic of life. For example, someone warms themselves by a fire, drinks fresh water, or stands in a pleasant breeze. The Father touches the candle with his finger, lights it by magic, and says that everyday magic follows ordinary laws, and he will demonstrate it. The Holy Father can light a candle and it will keep burning, but creation's magic is completely different. Luca now listens more closely, while his sister still sleeps. Using creation magic, the Holy Father can create real fire. It took the shape of a firebird and flew in a straight line. Aiden said it was simply amazing. The Father adds that if you drain all the mana from such a fire, it will die instantly as if it never existed, like when the firebird snaps its fingers. Using everyday magic, someone can make water they can drink. They hold a glass, drink the water, and feel refreshed. Water created by creation magic will not quench thirst. It is like drinking air, so a person can hold a glass of it and still be unable to satisfy their thirst. Aiden says the magic of everyday life is far more useful than the magic of creation. His father tells him not to be arrogant because Aiden has not yet learned to master everyday magic properly. The Holy Father agrees that Aiden is right. Everyday magic is the life force itself, the same power the most gracious goddess who created their entire world shared with them. Luke's face changes to surprise and dawning awareness of what's happening. He now understands. Once mana is gone, The object that this creation magic made disappears, but there are still some nuances. The clay dolls Luca made did not disappear even when his mana dropped to 0. They stopped moving, but kept their shape intact. Luca remembers how well they worked then, and his father said the dolls looked creepy. Still, he relied on the magic of everyday life, not the magic of creation. Luca is already completely confused and understands nothing. In the end, he still does not understand, and Luca thanks him silently. Some people in the room laugh and smile. The Holy Father says there is one key difference between the two magics. Each magic requires using different parts of the body. The power of the God of Life rests in the crown. The power of the God of the Covenant is stored in the forehead. The throat controls the magic of creation. The power of the God of Life rests in the heart. Above the navel is the power of the God of Power. A container of mana lies under the navel and directs it to one part of the body. After a moment, Aiden admitted he still did not understand. Everyone laughed. The Holy Father said, "There are many kinds of magic. If you know what each one is for, a magician can improve faster." Creation magic, also called the magic of everyday life, is the power of the 4 elements, and once created, can exist without a magician's support. Powers magic, which I call an aura, strengthens the body and sharpens all of a person's senses. Life magic heals others' wounds, known as creation magic, or the magic of everything. It grants the powers of all 6 attributes but fades without mana recharge. The Holy Father suddenly asks Luke to step forward and demonstrate his magic. Luca is surprised to be the one called. Lanil wishes his friend good luck. Aiden warns Luke not to get burned. The main character responds only with a positive reply. The Holy Father asks Luke to cast any spell he knows. Luke says he'll do something simple. The Holy Father just wants to see how fast Luke's powers are developing, and the sister immediately understands his plan. Lucas stretches both arms forward and makes a water doll that Alice likes. The priest and the priestess watch Luca closely. She woke instantly, as if she had not slept at all, and called the doll by name. The doll's name is Poon, and the Holy Father says Luke has simply wonderful everyday magic. Surprised by his father's words, Luca asks if what his father is using is creation magic, since it seems that way. The priestess tells Luke that everyday magic can make many different shapes. The basic shapes are balls and cubes. The deity of creation gave them this magic to make their lives easier. The sister twists the figures around her finger. Luke closes his eye and realizes he has mastered the magic of everyday life enough to shape it into many forms. Creating a firebird, like the Holy Father did, using everyday magic would be impossible. Luca says it's easier to use everyday magic than to build human dolls and get them to move, and his sister looks at him in surprise, not understanding what he was talking about. Surprised, the priestess can hardly believe her ears. Everyday magic is only part of the God of creation's power, since this God created the world and people cannot compare. Only that God has the right to use everyday magic to create something like a person. A farmer bursts into the church holding a stone that Luke somehow created in a fit of anger and disappointment with himself. The farmer holds up the stone and says he found it on the village outskirts and had never seen anything like it. Luca is surprised because he recognizes his stone. The Holy Father is curious since it looks like a gem, and the priestess asks to be given the stone so she can examine it. Sister Ulrika studies the stone, touches it with her index finger, and says it reacts to mana. The Holy Father says the stone is very unusual, and the sister replies that it seems completely harmless. Sister Ulrika recommends keeping the unusual stone. Everyone looks at her with slightly puzzled expressions. Notice that Luke forgot about this stone and acted quickly out of emotion. The priest says their conversation is over for today. Luca feels ashamed, remembering the moment with the stone on the field. The Holy Father asks the priestess how she is handling Luke's magic. The woman replies that the bow's power is simply incredible. Many children gather around the boy to create something like a human being. Sister Ulrika smiles a little and thinks Luca probably just has an overly stormy childhood imagination. Luke's mud doll just lies there, but the priestess believes it's impossible to make anything that resembles a human. Margrave Christopher Ecclem, exhausted and frightened, tells him he has come to say that after 10 years, they have recovered the body of the son of the Viscount family. The Margrave says the Viscount's son's carriage fell off a cliff into a magical forest, offers his condolences, and adds that he heard there was a ferocious monster in that forest. The man says the Viscount has been through a lot. The Viscount asks permission to build a grave for his son, and the Margrave says it was, of course, possible, and there was no need to ask him, though he wonders who was to blame for the accident. But it does not matter now. The Margrave says it may even have been God's blessing, since the man's son did exactly as he wanted until his death, and urges that the man be buried with full honors, while the Viscount thanks the man. The Margrave tells Nicholas he will attend the wake, and Nicholas says they can combine the visit with the next check by checking the Viscount's schedule, and the Margrave notes Nicholas is as quick and accurate as ever, as expected. Nicholas, Toaston's second son, shows the schedule notebook to the VI count, and the man asks if he can see the schedule, adding that his life is always under pressure and danger because of his duties as a Margrave. The Viscount did not mean that. The Margrave says nothing terrible will happen, and if it does, it's better to involve a criminal, adding that soldiers and civilians must not be wasted because they are the country's strength. The Viscount nervously says it's a good joke. Nicholas warns you should not have provoked the Viscount so much, and the Margrave admits he is ready to kill his own son out of self-pity, which infuriates the man. Then the Margrave asks how his son and grandson are doing, and Nicholas says they are gaining strength in the village. After asking Nicholas to send his greetings to his father and brother Roger, the Margrave hears Nicholas promise he will definitely do it, and looks up at the sky, hopeful that Ed and Luca will be strong and resist the curse. A tree with a thick trunk covered in countless flowers. A wide clearing filled with flowers. An elf-eared girl laughs and says she definitely feels something unusual. Smiling contentedly, she looks ahead and says she can feel the power of the magic crystal while flower petals drift around her. She spots a magic crystal and wonders what kind of person could have created it. Before her lies a vast area of mountains and forests fenced off and marked with a sign. In a creepy forest, the trees bend into an arch. Slime coats the ground where centipedes crawl, and bugs such as mosquitoes and midges fly about. The Viscount held a knife to protect the house and blamed his foolish son for everything that happened to them, while the son did not understand and screamed in the cart as the horse plunged down the cliff and smashed into the fence. The slime grows and materializes into the Viscount's son. The creature insists it is not evil and will never forgive Edward for anything. Beaming with joy, a girl looks at something, points her fingers forward, and hums a tune. Alternately, she presses her fingers on the keys that make the notes do, re, and the final mi. She taps along to the music and smiles. A dark-haired boy is sitting next to him, pointing and making a sound. The girl presses the next fa key, and the main character uses wind magic to form blocks of air. The main character and the girl sit on the floor. Behind them at the table, several people are talking. Archie presses the keys, and the boy makes a sound. Archie keeps pressing various keys while the boy keeps making sounds. This arrangement did not last long. The boy is already dizzy. He thinks it would be great if fusion could be used so the keys themselves would make sounds. Arch turns to his surprised brother. The main character recognizes the feeling. He pictures himself manipulating a tiny person in his hands. He remembers a smiling man telling him that one day he would feel a click in his body that would lift magical restrictions or let him learn new skills. Archie grows more joyful because things now happen faster. The calm protagonist tells her it is because the keys themselves make a sound. Inside him, the power makes his head feel clearer, and that is why he does not want to stop studying magic. A man at the table speaks firmly to the children and tells them to be quiet because Tostan has arrived. The boy, holding his head, apologizes to Mr. Tostan and then to us. The man in the shirt says it's fine because he's leaving soon. Thanking them for their time, he says goodbye to Edward and Sonia. A smiling man and woman tell him they understand. The sound of people toasting comes from a wooden house surrounded by a forest. Luca asks Edward what they were discussing. The man says his grandfather will visit them next time. Luca stands and asks whether Grandpa is running errands for the Margrave. Archie looks pleased that Grandpa is coming. Edward confirms this, explaining he is a servant of the Margrave who oversees the harvest in the villages. Sonia clears the dishes from the table. The protagonist watches her grandmother with interest. The girl happily repeats the word, grandmother. Edward laughs and says she is resting and living with her grandfather. Sonia says it still feels sudden. The man says it is all because of the monsters. The man remembers the rocky forest and says monsters from the magic forest have begun appearing in other areas. So the local wildlife started moving away, and Edward thinks they are afraid of something. Monsters are a humanoid race that uses magic, appearing as a human-like silhouette with white eyes and a mouth. Magical beasts are creatures that can use magic. The dark dog lowered its head. The main character worries whether this will affect their village. Archie clutches her cheeks in fear and says that something bad is coming. She feels scared. Luca hugs his sister. Edward smiles and tells her everything is fine because the sacred tree protects their village and monsters cannot approach. Since the village was founded, I have only seen forest wolves here. Night is falling. Edward reassures the girl and tells the children to wash up and go to bed quietly. Night is falling. Edward and Sonia sit at a table while a serious-faced man holds a mug and a bottle. He hopes nothing will happen when the old man arrives. Sonia says the rumors about magical beasts are frightening. Sonia, looking worried, says she only wants to live with all of them in peace and quiet. Edward agrees with her. Then they turn their attention to Luke, who stands in the middle of the room and yawns. The adults are surprised the children are still awake. Luca holds a crying girl in his arms. The main character says she was frightened by a story about monsters. Apologizing, the main character says he did not mean to wander at night. Edward and Sonia look at them in surprise. Edward lifts Luke into his arms and laughs, telling him not to apologize because they are family. Sometimes it's okay to stay up late together. Sonia holds Arte and agrees that as long as they are all here, Arte will not be afraid. Smiling, the man raises a finger and tells the children he will handle the monster if it appears. Archie agrees. Smiling, the girl says her brother will protect them, and the angry father insists that their dad will protect her. Luca points to the bottle on the table and asks his father if it is alcohol. Edward confirms and says it is made from a magical herb, so it tastes magical. All four sit at the table as Luca asks again about the magical taste, and his father says it is hard to explain. But all food containing mana taste like that. The wolf they had just eaten tasted strangely magical, and the wolf with the odd coat turned out to be fried meat. The boy watches his father slowly pour alcohol into a glass. Edward says it feels amazing, so he takes a small sip and enjoys it. The main character thinks about how they take a small sip to taste it and remembers similar sake kits in Japan. A bottle and small glasses suddenly fall onto the table with a clatter. Everyone is surprised except the main character, who hasn't noticed it yet. All four stare in disbelief at the objects that have appeared out of nowhere, and Luca, now awake, asks what they are. Surprised, he found the glass bottle and the stacks on the table after he remembered them. Edward pulls himself together and asks what it is for. The main character tells him they are for drinking alcohol. Smiling at the boy, the man explains that because they were made with magic, they will soon disappear, promises to use them, and thanks the boy for helping Sonia. His mother tells him he is amazing. The main character ignores what others say and is stunned, thinking only about how he did it. A glass bottle with stacks flashed in his mind, but he held that image for only a second. Luke wonders whether the development of skills the priest was just talking about is really the ability to bring fantasies to life. He wonders why this is happening now, and whether the image is familiar, then stops when he realizes it is not, and begins to feel dizzy. Everyone stays seated at the table. Arcee asks where her stack is too. They all stare at the girl in surprise. Tearful, she points at herself with her finger and asks where her stack is and why there is no one for her. Edward and Sonia turn to Luke, who clutches his head in fear as he realizes he understands everything. He keeps pressing his hands to his head. Luca would love to make another for Arch, but he has no idea how it was done. Tearful, the girl looks at her brother and asks again where her stack is. He tells her not to cry and says he'll figure out something else. The main character holds his hands in front of him, and a glowing ball appears between them. Everyone watches it. His father smiles, wondering whether Luca is squeezing mana, and Sonia stares at the boy in surprise, not understanding how it's possible. The mother realizes the stone that caused the noise in the church was made by Luke. Then, a beautiful smooth ball appears. Everyone looks at the ball and smiles. The boy says it turned out well and asks our chef if it will do. Joyfully, the girl reaches toward the glowing ball. She says it's a very beautiful stone and thanks her brother. A column of light suddenly hits the table, revealing a kneeling man with pointed ears who picks up the stone and examines it with a smile as everyone stares at him in shock. A man suddenly appears, inspects the ball, and smiles as he says, "It looks great." Luca stares at her in surprise as his parents glare at him, and he cannot understand how she appeared so suddenly. Sonia scoops Archie into her arms, knocking over the chair she was sitting on. Edward thrusts a fist forward and, with a malicious tone, asks who he is. Archie cries and reaches out because the stone was taken from her. Night has fallen. A girl in a dress stands before a huge, thick tree with lush leaves. She lifts her head and asks the sacred Siritri why it called her so late at night. The girl realizes he is overwhelmed with joy. She tries to understand what is happening. A pillar of light suddenly appears before her, and the same person who appeared like that in Luke's house steps forward. The girl looks at him questioningly. Surprised by the girl's appearance, she realizes how incredible this power is and briefly thinks the girl might be an elf before dismissing the idea. She recognizes him as a high elf as he raises his hand and looks up at the tree, indicating it is sacred. A girl in a dress bows to him and addresses him as a gentleman, saying her name is Rika. She is a half-elf and a priestess of the sacred tree of Syra. The elf raises his palm toward him and asks him to end the formalities. He tells Ulrika that Sira is a beautiful name, but she must not say the tree's true name because it is bound to its life force, and as a priestess, she must guard him. Ulrika nods at the elf and asks why he came here. The elf says the name Alia. The girl looks at him, puzzled. Smiling at Ulrika, the elf says she would call him Alia because if he gave his full name, they'd be here until morning. Ulrika agrees and asks why he is here. Alia steps in front of the girl and says he wants to see the item she just received. The girl asks him again. The elf apologizes to Ulrika because she perceives time differently after the event a couple of days ago. He says this thing is round. The girl realizes what Alia means. This is the mysterious stone the protagonist conjured. Ulrika apologizes to him because she already gave this stone to the village headman. All goods made here go to the Margrave. Alia says that's a shame. Ulrika asks the elf whether this stone has any special powers, while Alia holds up her finger and prepares to tell her something. Alia smiles and admits there is actually nothing inside the stone. Ulrika, surprised, says she understands everything. The elf smiles and says the only one who is special here is the one who made this stone. Ulrika looks at the elf in surprise and thinks about the words someone made him say. Alia presses her finger to his temple and says he feels something. A column of light falls on him and he disappears. With her hand on the sire tree, Ulrika asks for help finding Miss Relia's trace, wonders where he might have gone, then holds her head, closes her eyes, and realizes she has found him. She sees a house in front of her and realizes it is Luke's, with hills and trees behind it, and a tree with a roof standing in front. The girl runs off and tells the tree she is gone. Ulrika hopes the elf will not cause trouble there. Sonia holds a crying Archie in fear, while Edward points his sword at the elf holding the stone. Everything on the table is scattered. Malicious Edward asks Alia whether he is an elf and why he is here, says he won't let anyone hurt his family, and thinks that because he didn't even notice his movement, it must be magic. Smiling, Alia holds up a stone and tells them she came here following the stone's trail. Crying, Archie waves her hands and says the stone is hers because her brother made it for her. Her mother tells her to calm down. Luca asks for the stone to be returned to his sister. Alia gives him a questioning look, and Edward looks surprised. The protagonist stares at the elf, then sees a man with a malicious smile and realizes it is him. Alia comes down, approaches the boy, and holds his head as she asks whether he made the stone. Angry, Edward rushes forward with a sword and orders the elf to take his hands off his son, or he will not vouch for himself. The elf blocks the sword with his hand. Alia holds out his hand in front of him as a broken sword point flies by, and he apologizes for scaring them. Edward holds a broken sword and stares at the elf in shock. Alia silently warns him not to anger the half-elves because they are not equals. The elf stares sternly at the shocked man. They must not anger the elves because if they do, the whole country will die and no one will survive. Luca glares at the elf, says he is Luca, asks the elf his name and whether he is really an elf like Dad said. Edward looks at his son in surprise. Alia steps in front of the boy and, with a kind expression, says he really is an elf, and the boy may call him Alia. Luca says he will then ask another question. Luca asks Alia why he came and frightened his family, and Alia looks at him in surprise while the boy's family watches in fear. The boy tells the elf he made his sister cry. Arch looks at his brother with tears in his eyes. The main character tells the elf that on top of everything else, the elf has angered him. The elf looks at the man with a serious expression. Alia bowed slightly to fate and asked for forgiveness, and his curiosity had made him rush here without thinking. The elf hands Archer the stone ball, saying it belongs to her, and Archer accepts it happily and thanks the elf. Smiling, Alia tells them he did not mean to scare anyone and asks if they can help him and how people show remorse. Luca and his father look at him seriously. Uruka, breathless and already exhausted, runs toward Luke and his family's house and heads to Mr. Alia. Ulrika enters the house and is shocked to find Alia on his knees, asking the family to accept his sincere regrets. Luke says his posture should show his remorse. Edward looks at Ulrika and calls her sister. Edward points at the bent Alia and asks Ulrika if she knows that elf, surprising her. Archie smiles as he plays with a stone. With a serious face, Ulrika says that even the king must bow to this elf and that he is a high elf, leaving everyone surprised. Edward, Sanya, and Ulrika kneel beside Alia in regret. They apologize to him for their ignorance and say they did not mean to make him angry. The elf tells them to stop, saying he should be the one apologizing. Ark and Lucas watch the scene, dumbfounded. Luke stares at the high elf, surprised he is one, since he did not know his sister was a half-elf. They all sat down at the table. Ulrika closed her eyes and apologized to the boy because she stayed silent to avoid frightening the villagers. Alia says people spread rumors about elves, so the villagers grew afraid of them, even though elves rarely get angry. Ulrika looks at the main character with regret and asks whether he is afraid of her. Luke flatly denies it. Looking at the high elf sipping from a mug, he says, Alia isn't scary either. They just needed to talk to each other. Alia smiles. The high elf offers his hand to the boy with a wide smile and says he wants to be friends. Everyone looks at him in surprise. Archie smiles while holding a stone. Alia says his magic crystal is simply amazing. Luke says it is just an ordinary stone with no abilities. Alia looks at the boy and tells him that not having powers does not make him useless, and he insists it is a real masterpiece, leaving Lucas staring at him, surprised and questioning. The elf leaps up from his seat, startling everyone. He launches into a long explanation about a magic crystal. Alia holds both hands out and continues the long story about the crystal. Everyone stares at him in shock, and Luca asks him to be shorter. The elf says he will now demonstrate everything. Light gathers in Alias's hands. A sword appears above his hands. Alia blushes and holds the wooden sword she just created in front of her and says it takes a lot of mana to make. The elf grows angry and raises his sword, saying that making objects is one of the hardest parts of creation magic. Ulrika asks the elf to stop there. Alia glares at the girl and asks what she needs because he has just started. The family is very grateful to him for his detailed explanation. Not everyone knows enough to understand an elf, but everyone is shocked by how much information the elf has given them. The elf replies sarcastically that they have a lot of enthusiasm and will repeat everything. Alia awkwardly holds her head and hands the sword to Edward as a gift to apologize for the intrusion, and Edward thanks him. Edward looks at the smiling elf and says he understands the elf is interested in the power of the bow and will try to talk to the village headman and buy him out. His mother tells Luke that everything would be easier if he told the truth in church. Luca apologizes. Alia beams with joy and asks her father if it is true, and he says he is very glad and thanks them. Smiling, the main character looks at the elf and can hardly believe they were afraid of him. It's still night outside. Edward says it's getting late and they should leave. Ulrika agrees. A coachman drives a carriage pulled by 2 horses, hills and trees passing behind, while an elderly man and a woman wearing glasses sit inside. The man adjusts his tie and says the funeral of the Viscount's son went well. The woman agrees and calls him master. A woman with a serious expression adjusts her glasses and says she is still not convinced the Viscount's family is responsible for the incident with Edward. She refuses to let my sweet grandchildren be bound by a death contract. He tells her this is an act of respect for the laws of the aristocracy. She understands, but something in her resists. He thinks the stubbornness of the half-elves speaks through her. Caroline is a half-elf who wears glasses and works as the headmaid in the man's house, carrying many responsibilities, and she is the sister of Ulraka, the priestess of the village of Tram. She is also his mother-in-law and Edward's grandmother. Her relationship with the man is rather complicated. Christopher tells us his wife, who is Edward's mother, is Caroline's daughter from her first marriage and is now married to the headman of the village of Trame. She has now decided to pretend to be his wife, which makes her appear to be Luke and Archie's grandmother. Caroline tells us they have arrived. Christopher asks the coachman to stop the carriage here. Christopher and Caroline step out of the carriage into the fresh air. Not sure who they mean. Christopher asks how many there are, and a woman replies, there are about 200. Calmly, the man says there are more of them than he expected as a horde of armed men moves toward them. A bearded man in a Viking helmet, wielding a sword, says they will take the woman and the money later and orders his men to kill the old man first. Christopher says they attacked the nobles on purpose. He is not sure whether that was bravery or stupidity. Caroline says it was probably stupidity. The chief of the horde tells them that they don't care about their status, points his sword at them, and orders them to attack them. Christopher tells them they will now learn why they became nobles and holds out his hand where a magical flash appears. A flash strikes the horde's leader, sending him flying and making him drop his sword, and he lies on the ground, coughing, asking if it is magic. Christopher stands quietly, surprised he survived, and asks the man to raise his head. A man on all fours says even magic could not kill 200 people at once. Christopher points and asks him to look back. All his men lie behind him, already killed by Christopher's magic, and he asks in shock what it is. Christopher tells him it's all magic. Frozen in place, he keeps staring at the dead people. Carolina adjusted her glasses and said seriously that the blow was like hitting a stone slab and enough to take out so many people. The man drops to the ground and gives a nervous laugh. Caroline says the aristocrat's strength lies not in authority, but in magic. Christopher adds that magic can even destroy an army. With a gloomy expression, Christopher says that aristocrats are no different from monsters defending their possessions. The carriage is pulling away. Christopher says he thought the Viscount sent them, but there's more. They decided to do it because of the monster that came from the magical forest. Christopher and Caroline sit facing each other. Caroline says a group of refugees were driven from their homes by monsters. Christopher says he first learned about the monster 10 years ago when the conflict with the Viscount began. Telling the woman, he says that judging by his direction, he is headed to the village of Trame and asks why he is still alive since they have not announced a reward for him. Caroline pushes up her glasses and says they tried to find him, but this monster hides well and learns quickly. It's a lot of trouble. Christopher asks whether she has found a priestess for the world tree, and Caroline says she has not, because elves and half-elves lack the strength for that role. She says only a high elf would be suitable for such a role, since they created the world tree, and Christopher asks how it differs from other sacred trees. He says the world tree will reveal its powers only with a priestess, and it's not surprising they have so many problems with monsters, while Caroline says half-elves and elves can be eliminated until a high elf appears because they are powerless. The horses keep pulling the carriage. Christopher suggests someone with enough power might appear. Caroline, surprised, says she has never heard anything so absurd. Christopher replies that anything is possible. Luca created a stone. Luca and Archie bathe together. Archie examines it and says it sparkles beautifully. The stone is a mana orb containing the elements of water, fire, air, and earth. Adding a specific mana changes the ball's color, with water turning it blue, fire turning it red, air turning it yellow, and earth turning it brown, while Archie is happy and Lucas stands with his hand raised. A sudden pain makes the main character clutch his chest and sigh heavily as Archie watches him with a questioning look. Luke has been suffering from chest pain lately and is unsure whether it is physical. When he used magic, he found his manipulations became smoother. Tearful, Archie asks her brother not to get sick because she does not want him to. Luca smiles at her. Luca tells Archer everything is fine, and that as long as she keeps smiling, he will stay healthy. Archer watches the stone begin to glow after he picks it up. He promises to protect her smile. Luca begins to tell Archer he is her older brother, but stops before he can finish. Archer looks at him. The main character turns to his sister and asks whether she heard that voice just now. Archie says she did not hear it. She never said it. But if Luca had stopped paying attention to her, she would have cried for hours. Luca says he can hear the voice again. Somehow, it brings back memories. Surprised, Akite looks at his brother and asks what kind of voice that is. Luca says it sounds strange. Their mother orders the children to come out at once. A black, viscous liquid lies in the void. The liquid formed from a mana clot. The clot now lies on the ground next to the wheel. The liquid found a host and entered it. House I Count's new head presents demands to the Margrave. The man points angrily at something with one finger while holding a dagger in his other hand. Out of respect for aristocratic law, he agreed to these conditions, but nothing stops him from destroying their family later. They apologize to their son because it's the only way to survive, while a voice asks why he is here and insists he is not at fault, blaming that woman and that man. A clot began shaping into a human form, repeatedly feeding its wearer memories of despair and drawing mana from that sorrow until it grew into a powerful monster that could form its own hand. Now in human form, he looks at the hills and trees and says those who tried to kill him will answer for everything. A village sits among hills and forests. Lucas says he can now make 2 dolls that act on their own without his constant orders. One doll holds a stone and the other hits the ground with a hoe. A thoughtful protagonist stands before them and says he wants to train more often. The boy remembers his father warning that Luke should not make so many clay dolls needlessly because they scare people. Luke looks at the hoe and realizes something. Remembering his ball, the main character decides to channel mana through it, then picks up a hoe and directs a stream of mana into the hoe to increase its strength. The hoe cracks when the boy strikes the ground. He studies the tool. Luca had thought channeling mana into objects would be easy, but it was not. It feels like navigating a confusing maze. His father had said that. The material's properties also seemed to be changing. The boy remembered watching his father practice with a sword alongside Archie and hearing him say that Mr. Ilya's sword was amazing. Even a spell could be cut with it. Luca watches the guys who approach and wave at him. One of them asks why he is there. A boy tells Luca that starting today, he is in the processing team too. The man in the hat says he was surprised to learn that Luke made that stone. He looks at them, unsure and uncomfortable, as his father asks him to say hello to Adam and Jonathan. Luca greets the boy named Aiden and the man in the hat named Jonathan. The main character stares at them in disbelief, realizing they are completely ordinary. Jonathan warns that the magic herb absorbs mana, so if Aiden is careless, it will drain him. Adam asks if Jonathan is serious. The boy holds his head and says he probably should have told them he was pleased to meet them. His father watches him. Edward fears he might be abandoned, so it would be better if at least one family member always looked after him. Edward pats his son on the head, making him smile, and asks him not to overdo it. Luca agrees and says everything will be fine. Luca picks up a stone and thinks he can use it to cover an object with mana, but pouring mana into an object is much harder. Glowing patterns form in the stone. Directing mana along the correct path lets you greatly improve an item's properties. The boy keeps staring at the stone. It seemed to him to work like an amplifier. He says he knows his body well, so there is no need to look for a way. The main character watches the stone start to crack and realizes he poured too much mana into it. Glowing mana oozes from cracks in the stone and spills over its surface, and the main character realizes he is about to explode. The boy keeps the stone in one hand and makes a fist with the other, doubling the reinforcement by covering his arm with mana. Luca waves his hand, making the air ripple around him as he uses wind magic to muffle sound. Water begins to circle the stone. The main character had specially wrapped to prevent its fragments from flying apart. The stone explodes, breaking into many small fragments. The tense protagonist squints and looks at it. Holding his hand in front of him, the boy sighed and said he was scared as the wind around him subsided. Only a few small fragments of the stone remained on Luke's wet hand. Luke says he needs to be careful with mana. Suddenly, the boy's chest starts to hurt badly. Fear appears in his eyes, and he clutches it with his hands. Gritting his teeth, the protagonist tries to bear the pain, but cannot, and starts to fall to the ground. As the main character starts to fall, screaming, someone behind him grabs both his hands and stops him from falling. Luke thanks the person who saved him, turns around, and is surprised by who caught him. He studies his two clay dolls that help him stand, and cannot understand how they could save him without an order from him. The dolls stand before him. Luca raises two fingers toward them. The boy realizes he did not give them an order. The dolls lifted their arms and started to sway from side to side. As always, they obey Luke. Watching them, the main character has been giving orders with his mind lately, so he might not even have noticed when he told them to catch him. Still sitting on the grass, Luca spots several silhouettes ahead. Looking closer, he recognizes his father, Tostan, and his mother with Archie. They all look at him in surprise. For some unknown reason, Ars is crying. The boy wonders why her face is so sad. Silently, he promises her that everything is fine, because now their older brother is coming. Abruptly stopping mid-sentence, Luca feels his chest pain return and breathes heavily, not understanding what is happening because it feels like something is inside him. An unknown voice fills Luca's head and begs him not to leave, the boy thinking it's like someone's team as he closes his eyes in pain. A worried father rushes over, grabs his shoulder, and asks whether he is hurt and if he is okay. Archie, wincing through the pain, tells him he is fine and just tired. His little sister suddenly rushes into his arms in tears and asks Luke not to lie. Luca is surprised by this. She sadly tells him that she does not want her brother hurt or sick. Sonia says Archer wanted to visit her brother, and while they were walking, she suddenly began to cry. Edward says Archer must have noticed her brother was ill. The boy comforts his sister and tells her everything is already fine. The girl whimpers. Edward tells his son he needs to rest because there's still little work to do, and Luca looks at his father in surprise and asks why. Tostan tells them the Margrave's representative, Mr. Callisto, has arrived. Luca asks whether Grandpa is already here, and Archie is pleased. Several others approach, and one asks if Callisto has arrived. Edward confirms it. The man asks why Callisto arrived earlier than promised if something happened. Edward says in a serious voice that magical beasts have begun migrating because of the monster's movements, and they are apparently heading toward their village. Luke's father stands before a crowd and tells them they counted about 100 wolf-like animals, leaving the listeners surprised and asking him about it. One says, "They're the same as that forest wolf." Another says, "There are too many." And the main character stands beside his mother and sister with a serious expression, thinking about magical beasts. Edward reassures the crowd that everything will be fine since Mr. Callisto is here and they will investigate the case together. But for now, they must stop the panic. Archie hugs Luca and promises to protect her brother. Luca thanks her, but realizes he should have said it. The sun hangs behind the mountains. Christopher and Caroline step out of the carriage. Christopher informs the others they arrived without incident. He tells Caroline they should pose as elderly. The woman asks him to give it to her. Smiling, he says he'll have to apologize to her real husband. Caroline tells him not to worry, since she and her husband have agreed on everything. She then reminds him to change his clothes. Caroline takes on the appearance of a grandmother, while Christopher becomes a hunched old man with a cane. A woman holds a suitcase. He asks Luca and Archie to wait a moment, then laughs. A tower topped by a bell stands. Christopher says he finds it hard to pretend to be a commoner, and Caroline tells him it suits him. Several wolves in the forest have white eyes, huge drooling mouths, and horns jutting from their heads. Houses appear in the distance. Someone says there is a village ahead and that they have provoked magical beasts. One of the beasts sticks out its tongue and says it can use it. The long-haired creature laughs and says he will, standing beside the wolves as liquid drips from his hand. At Luke's house, Christopher and Caroline knock on the door. Christopher tells Luke and Archer that their grandfather has arrived, and Caroline asks how they are doing. Luca welcomes Grandma and Grandpa. Edward smiles and waves, and Archie is glad to see them. Callisto, whose real name is Christopher, has come on behalf of the Margrave. Luca notices that his father looks like him. Callisto asks if they remember him. Luca looks at Caroline and doubts she could be a grandmother, thinking she looks more like a sister from the church. And Caroline tells the children they have grown up a lot. The main character points at his grandmother and asks why her ears are so long. At the idea that she might be an elf, Edward and Sonia react in shock. Callisto realizes they didn't tell them. Caroline says she is a half-elf, which means they also have elven blood. Edward and Sonia look at each other in silence as Archie points to herself and asks if she is an elf, and Luca laughs and says she is a little bit. Edward admits to himself that she is actually their great-grandmother, and the part about elven blood is true. He was surprised at the time when a bloodline appeared in his mind. Smiling, Lucas's father thinks Carolina and Callisto are tired after a long walk and offers them some food. Callisto agrees and says his stomach is completely empty. Several plates of food and candles sit on the table. They all sat at the table and began to eat, while Callisto stroked the main character's head and Caroline looked at RJ. A bottle of alcohol sits on the table. Callisto drinks the contents of the glass, smiles, and says, "It's delicious." Edward says, "They only made it recently, so the manor hasn't left the drink yet. Callisto would have walked here just for that." Grandpa examines the stack and asks where they got such an exquisite glass. "It looks like the work of a master." Edward tells Callisto that Luca made them. The grandfather spins around in shock and stares at his grandson. Luke's father says the boy made them by accident using magic. Callisto scolds his son because creating glass with magic is not like lighting a fire. Grandpa says even creating the simplest materials takes a lot of effort, and the main character watches them in disbelief as Edward finally agrees. A voice in the boy's head tells him he barely got it for his birthday, and he is surprised. Still wondering where that voice came from, he is interrupted by Callisto, who asks how he made the stack, says he feels nothing from it, and wonders whether it is magic. All eyes are on Luke and his grandfather. The boy admits he doesn't know how it happened. He only thought about a stack for his dad, and then they appeared. Callisto asks his grandson if he can do that. Grandpa makes a ball of water with his finger. Luca recognizes it as an everyday magic water ball and says he can conjure the same. Grandpa looks at the boy in surprise, thinking there are no distortions and that he does it so easily. Callisto tells the boy he has had enough, drops a water balloon into the stack, and Luca agrees but then bursts it. Before the protagonist could even let go of his hand, Callisto jumped up from the table and, together with Caroline, looked at Luca in shock. Caroline asks how he did it, but her grandfather interrupts, saying the real water created by the magic of everyday life has just disappeared. The main character stares at them in disbelief, unsure why they are so shocked, and gives them a positive answer. Edward and Sonia look at Callisto and Caroline, while Fright Archer, caught in a misunderstanding, watches silently and eats. Smiling, Carolina praises her grandson as a real talent. Callisto pats Luca on the head and says this is his granddaughter. Edward turns to his wife and says that even Mr. Aaliyah noticed Luke's talent, and Sonia agrees with him. Callisto wants to know who Mr. Aaliyah is. Edward says he is a high elf who recently broke into their house. Callisto understands everything. Despite staying calm, he and Caroline shockingly ask again about the high elf. Caroline asks Edward whether that is true. Grandpa asks whether the high elf is here. Edward tries to calm them both, but an angry Callisto orders Tom not to calm him. Luke's father tells them Ulrika's sister said Mr. Alaya has an elven dream, so they must not talk to him. Luke asks his grandfather about an elven dream. His grandfather explains it is the state elves enter when they synchronize their mana with the world's mana. Sitting beside Archie, Caroline explains that elves can sleep for years or even decades without food or water, and a high elf's sleep can last even longer. Everyone rose from the table. Edward raised a finger and said he thought he'd wake in a month, just in time for Callisto to first arrive in the village. Callisto asked how he knew. Edward recalls the ball Luca made and says that under the rules it must be handed to the Margrave, so they plan to discuss with Callisto in a month whether it can be transferred to Mr. Aaliyah. Luca looks at his father, wondering if Aaliyah decided to sleep until that day. Luca can't understand the high elves. His father says Aaliyah probably found waiting a whole month too hard and just went to bed. Darkness is falling outside, and Grandpa says it's too late today, so it's better to greet him tomorrow, and Edward, pleased, says he is unlikely to be able to wake Aaliyah. Callisto glares at his son, says that even a greeting matters, asks whether Edward has forgotten the rumors about elves, and Edward thinks it over. Caroline warns with a serious face that there is no need to anger the half-elves because people are not equal, and doing so could destroy the whole country. Caroline and Callisto stare at the smiling family in shock. Edward says he remembers it and that Mr. Aaliyah will be fine. Luke says the high elf is strange but good. Grandpa asks what is wrong with them. He grows serious and says that in any case, manners are manners. Callisto thinks there is no smoke without fire. Rumors don't start for no reason, even if he's kind. A dark figure in a raincoat stands by a huge tree. People warn not to anger the high elves because no one will survive. A smiling girl hides in the foliage and says something about a bow and a ball. Callisto joined the villagers to strengthen their defenses against monsters. Several tall wooden towers each have one person standing on them. Several people stack stones to build a wall. Stakes are driven into the ground for defense against attackers. They can slow them down. Callisto gravely orders his son and the second man with the hammer. The main character points to the wooden screen where the animation appeared. Archie and another girl are watching it. At that moment, Luca was playing with magic. The girls look at him happily. He helped out around the house. Luca stands in front of his mother, who carries a basket. Archie holds a chair while the girl hangs the laundry out. Luca carries a basket of carrots. Overall, his days were fairly peaceful. A church stands at the center of the village. Suddenly, a loud noise rolls through the village. All was calm until a signal sounded, warning that the magical beast was approaching. A man on the tower strikes something with a hammer, triggering a loud signal. Callisto, Edward, and another man stand before the crowd listening to them. And Edward says he will first ask everyone to calm down. Everyone's expressions turn serious and angry. Edward says magical beasts are very dangerous. If they enter the village, many people will be harmed. Archon, Luca, and their mother stand there. Edward had already taken action against them. Edward clenches his fist and tells the crowd this is not the end, that Callisto is with them, a powerful magician sent by the Margrave, and that they need not fear the animals. Edward stands confidently with his sword arm raised, asking everyone to believe him because this is his home. The sword glows with the strange flame and then grows enormous. Luke's father tells everyone he will protect the village. The crowd grows joyful and energized, shouting Edward and Callisto's names. Edward says if anyone is hurt, contact the Holy Father and Sister immediately, and they will heal them. The Holy Father and Sister stand among the crowd. Joyful Edward walks up to the family with his hands raised and asks Archie if he is cool, and Archie smiles and says the sword is cool too. Callisto stares at his son's sword in surprise and asks where he got a blade so soaked in madasa. Edward laughs, says he was surprised too, and explains Mr. Alia made the sword for him. Callisto was stunned and said it was impossible, asking whether the High Elf himself had created the sword. Smiling, Edward says he can hardly believe it, because now even someone like him can fight back with the help of a magician while his family watches. Grandfather points at the sword and says he is not talking about it, and that a high elf could not have created and given a sword. Edward insists he did it, but Callisto argues with him. Callisto approaches Edward and gravely orders him never to show the sword to anyone. A frightened Edward agrees. Callisto asks Edward and Luca to come with him, and the boy and his father agree. But the mother is surprised. Frightened, she asks Edward whether Luca will come with them. Archie holds his hands in front of him and says, "Grandpa is scary." Rampa tells Sonia that Luca will be with him. Edward assures them he will only help with arrows and tells his wife not to be afraid. Luca greets them, but his mother objects because he is only 10 years old. Standing before his mother, who holds Archie in her arms and says she wants to go, the main character smiles and tells her he wants to protect the village, Mum and Archie. His younger sister and mother relaxed after his words and smiled at him. Luca promises he won't get into trouble, and his mother and Archie believe him. Edward looks at Callisto. People stand behind stakes forming barricades. A person stands holding a sword. Another person holds a bow. Luca places a bundle of arrows on the ground and says he brought more. Jonathan examines the arrows and says he won't get into trouble, but something is bothering him. Luca asks what is wrong. Jonathan picks up a bundle of arrows tied with a rope and says there are many, but still not enough for everyone. Luca raises a finger and tells Jonathan not to worry, because the arrows are meant only for them. The main character runs off, saying he went to make arrows for everyone else, and Jonathan watches him in surprise. Jonathan asks the running boy if he has enough mana, and Luca finds this odd, since the boy can draw mana from outside and does not need to use his own, so they are likely worried because he is just a child. Roger stands before Edward and Callisto. His grandfather tells him the scouting party did a good job. Edward asks Roger whether there are any changes. Roger tells them the magical beasts have stopped at the forest exit and another group has joined them. Callisto and Edward are surprised. Two magical beasts stand side by side. Edward wonders why they have teamed up, since they usually fight each other for territory. Edward turns to Callisto and asks for his opinion, and Grandpa suggests someone else might be controlling them. A dark silhouette stands on a hill among the trees, watching something. It raises its hand. The sentry on the tower looks out and fearfully tells everyone that the animals have begun to move. People below look up at him. Edward turns to Callisto, who tells him he heard everything, and Callisto says, "We need to move forward while Roger stands behind me." Roger stands before a crowd armed with bows, all preparing to fight back against magical beasts. Edward warns everyone to keep shooting at the animals without stopping, saying the main thing is to keep firing while he and Callisto finish them off. The magical beasts began to attack, charging forward while Roger and the other archers are preparing to shoot. Edward points his sword at the beasts and orders them to shoot as a hail of arrows rains down, some striking the beasts. Several arrows already stick out of the beasts, but they keep pressing forward. A dark silhouette stands at the top. The creature on the rock just stands there and doesn't join the fight, so they didn't even notice it. It mocks them as brainless commoners and laughs. Callisto and Edward stand by, not attacking the enemy yet. Edward's serious expression shifts as he notices something. The spot where the creature stood is empty when he looks. Callisto asks him what happened. No one is in the grass and trees. Edward thinks he probably imagined it. Callisto looks at him, and Edward replies that nothing happened. Dark liquid starts moving across the grass. It is the creature that stood on the rock and then vanished. It keeps crawling through the grass, frightening a small mouse that runs away. Suddenly, the liquid sees a man on a hill and turns its attention to him. On the hill stands the main character, fists clenched, mentally supporting his father and grandfather. The creature does not understand what sort of strange man is standing there. The boy stares ahead, and the creature realizes the boy does not see it. It says that does not matter and keeps crawling toward the building while laughing. The liquid slips past people who do not notice it. The creature suddenly notices something. At Luke's front door, his mother holds Archie in her arms and another girl stands beside them. Worried, she turns to Sonia, calls her aunt, and asks whether everything will be okay. Sonia reassures her that they are strong and will cope. Ars agrees. Black liquid suddenly begins to stretch out of her mouth, and he appears, saying he recognized Sonia. Staring at Luke's mother, the creature says she is the woman who ruined his life. Liquid says he will not forgive her. All three spot the creature, and fear shows on their faces. Shifting into a human form, the creature tells her he will toy with her until nothing of her remains. The creature calls Sonia by name and sticks out its tongue. A girl screams and clings to her aunt, and Archie hides her face, saying she is scared. Sonia looks at the creature in fright and says, "This cannot be." Luca turns to the side, surprise on his face, as he realizes he has a bad feeling. Knowing he must go to his mother and sister, he starts walking home. Suddenly, he clutches his chest as the pain returns and drops to his knees, coughing. Callisto and Edward turn their attention to him. Both stare at the main character in fear. The father calls the boy by name, and Callisto asks what is wrong with him. A sharp pain flushes the boy's face, and he cannot tell where it came from, so he struggles to find the strength to hurry to his mother and Archie. Luke's soul won't let him go, and something inside is controlling his body. Edward leans over his son, who lies on the ground in pain, and asks Callisto what is happening. Callisto tries to understand. Callisto's face turns evil as he realizes everything and says it's impossible because contract magic is affecting the boy. Edward says Luke is very ill. With his eyes closed, the boy tries to focus his mana to find the source of the strange feeling and sense the spell someone cast. Using his mana, the main character tries to drive him away, and flashes of light appear before his eyes. A voice tells the boy to get ready. Luca opens his eyes and recognizes it, but it doesn't matter now, because he can feel the mana around him clearly. The main character springs to his feet and runs off, believing he must go, while his grandfather and father watch him and shout. Edward is stunned and asks Callisto why his son is so fast, and Grandpa tells Tom to follow him, saying he will handle things here by himself. Running so fast, the boy keeps leaving huge rings of air behind him. Aiden, with a sword slung over his shoulder, points an angry finger at Luke and asks what he is doing. Luke runs past him, knocks Aiden over, and makes him drop the sword. The main character runs up the path toward his house. At the door, he sees a creature, his mother, and two girls. The boy does not know what he is doing. Luca is unsure what he's doing with the people he cares about. The creature glares at Sonia with malice. The protagonist jumps onto the creature's head with his foot, surprising Sonia and the girls. The creature's head begins to deform. The main character is startled and realizes it is a slime. Luke's arrival makes all three happy because he saved them. The mother and the girl call him by name, and Archie calls out to him as a brother. Falling to the ground, the creature holds its head and asks how he had the nerve to hit it in the face, and Lucas steps in front of him and warns him not to touch his mother or sister. Luke looks down and sees his shoes beginning to dissolve after touching the creature. One shoe falls off his foot. Smiling, the creature stands and says, "This kid looks strange," then tries to make out the boy's face but can't. The slime screams and charges at the main character. Frightened, the boy realizes he should not touch him. The creature reaches for the bow and almost touches it when its father suddenly appears and severs its hand with one swing. The main character is relieved that his father saved him, and Sonia, Arch, and his niece are also glad about Edward's arrival. The creature cries out in pain, and he realizes that it is Edward again. As it says, it will not forgive him while calling him by name, and Edward glares at the creature, recognizing it. Edward stands before his son and tells him the Viscount's son has been dead for a long time. The creature says he is not dead, but that only Edward, the Margrave's son, will die. The boy looks at his father, who says he does not know how, but thinks he became a monster after death. Luke realizes Edward is the Margrave's son. Angry, Edward shouts at the creature that he doesn't care whether he's a monster or the Viscount's son, because he won't allow anyone to harm his family. The creature orders Edward to be silent, then attacks them both as Edward holds his sword, and Luca begins to conjure with both hands to protect his father. Without warning, the creature engulfed several clay dolls the main character had made. Stunned, it asks what it is. It grows angry and orders these dolls not to touch him because he is an aristocrat. Seizing the moment, Edward lunges at him with a huge sword to kill him. Edward tells the creature he stopped being an aristocrat the moment he became this. Edward swings his sword several times, cutting the creature as splashes fly outward in all directions and dolls begin to fall from it. Edward's crushing blow sends the creature's head flying off its shoulders as it screams his name. Sonia glares at him. Edward says he came because of his contract. Because of that, he has the family he cherishes. The creature's head lies on the ground, and he turns to his son. Sanya watches her husband calmly while Archie beams and says his dad and brother are so cool. They head to Edward and Luke. Lucas smiles, thinking how close he came to the worst this time and why he was born into a family that keeps memories of a past life. But he wants to remember and knows doing so would cost him the closeness he has with his family. A voice suddenly speaks inside the main character's head, telling him that this soul will be replaced, and his eyes go black. Luke points at his mother and sisters. Fragments form in the air, aimed at them. Edward stares at his son in shock. Edward realizes they are stone shells. He stares at his son, alarmed, and asks what he is doing. Sonia and Archie stare at Luca in surprise. Archie's face falls as she turns to her brother, who watches them without any emotion. Clay dolls he had made earlier stop the main character and knock him to the ground. Shocked, Edward cannot understand how even his own magic stopped him. Breathing heavily, the boy on the ground fights for breath. His fist clenches as he tries to understand what he just did. The main character's eyes return to normal, and he realizes through tears that he just tried to kill Ars. Everyone stares at the boy, and then someone says, "Despair is delicious." The creature's severed head says it feels power from the boy, but cannot remember anything. Holding his sword, Edward faces the head, as it says his memory was damaged during rebirth, and he realizes he is alive, but is unsettled by its female voice and struggles to understand what is happening. The head says the aristocratic boy and the slime that swallowed him are both dead, and only she is left. Edward points a sword at her and demands to know who she is and what she did with the bow. The head repeats Luke's name, says it suits him very well, and then starts making incomprehensible sounds. Gazing at the boy held by the dolls, she says she remembers nothing, but they must be linked to Luke. The main character feels a headache and holds his head with both hands. The severed head takes on a female form and says the boy's emotions taste delicious. Luca stares at her, frightened and trying to place her, and remembers standing in front of the house in a previous life with cars parked nearby. The main person is holding several boxes of ribbons in his hands. They are gifts for his mum, dad, and sister. One box is larger and the other is smaller. 3 people were born on the same day, but only one of them celebrated his birthday on a different date. Smiling, the main character says his father has long wanted the set. The gift will certainly make him happy. Luca realizes these are memories of his past life. Returning home happily, he tells his mum and dad and asks about the guests he notices in the house. Across from his parents, a dark-haired girl sits at the table, and the main character realizes she must be their neighbor. Smiling at him, she says, "Welcome home," and calls him Rue. He asks her angrily what she is doing in his house. The girl tells him his reaction is killing her. The main character's mother says he is in high school. The girl tells him that his parents have told him so much about him. His mother replies that he has not changed at all. The girl's smile fades. Then she points at the mother and tells her to be quiet, causing the mother to tilt her head to the side. Shocked, the main character asks mum and dad what's wrong with them, then drops all the boxes on the floor. He looks at his parents and asks the girl what is wrong with them. They sit motionless. Their eyes are completely white. Yelling, he demands to know what she did to them. She says they're fine, just unconscious. Smiling maliciously, she lifts her chin and tells the guy to ask more carefully about what she did to his sister Chi. A man approaches her with malice, screaming for Kiri and demanding to know what she did to her. The girl keeps smiling. She points to the sofa to show she is lying there. He turns and sees his sister's legs behind the sofa. The main character rushes over to find Shiri lying unconscious on the floor, sits beside her, and urges her to wake up. The girl approaches him from behind and points her hand at him, and he straightens his back, and she reports that she used magic to put her to sleep. Realizing he cannot move, the main character asks what kind of magic she means and why she needs it. Licking her lips, the girl says she needs it for food because she is a demon who feeds on human emotions like anger and love. Repeating the words magic and demons, he says they don't belong in a fairy tale, and she agrees but says she is the only demon in this world. She leans toward him, wraps one arm around his shoulder, and smiles as she tells him she has been reborn. He is scared. There are several elves of different heights. Demons use mind control magic, and the demon's only natural enemy is the high elves. The demon asks the man if he knows the spell the demons devised to fight these monsters and offers to explain it. She says it's a curse that commands him to kill everyone he cares about, recalling a high elf who admired people and their strength, and whose soul was marked by a curse. The girl reveals a dark demon with a terrifying expression. He killed so many people he became known as the Demon King. Demons began gathering around him to savor his torment. She embodies the faces of demons. The Demon King killed them all, calling them pests. A hand reaches toward the demons, making them afraid. Jiying, the demon girl, gathered the power of her fallen brethren and was reborn, while the man asks why his family is the one. The demon licks his lips and tells the main character there is nothing tastier than despair. She tells the boy's parents she was looking for the friendliest family nearby because the stronger the love, the deeper the despair, then looks at Chiri. The girl asks what could be worse than being killed by your own family. He asks what she means. She lifts her hand and he starts moving, realizing he has no control over his body. She wonders what the despair of a man who has killed his whole family would taste like. The man grabs his sister by the throat and begins strangling her. Angrily, he realizes his hands are moving on their own and tells the girl to stop. The demon says, "This is the curse. The deeper his love, the stronger his urge to kill." Trembling, the main character keeps strangling his sister as he fights to resist. The demon calls him a twisted soul and orders him to kill everyone he loves. Still resisting the curse, his grip at last gives way, and in tears, he thinks of his sister as precious. A scream comes from the man's house. A girl, standing with her back to him, says he is gorgeous. She says even a powerless person managed to fight back against the curse, and it calls that very sweet. She says he's trying to resist. The main character managed to get close and hit her, but she didn't even budge. Still holding his fist where he struck the demon, the man is told by her that he has the power of the holy sword. Angry, the main character enters. The demon tells him she doesn't even understand what's happening, as black liquid drips from the girl's eyes. The demon says, "It's amazing that a cornered person can do that." The demon throws her head back as cracks radiate from the impact, admitting that in this world her body is so fragile she was killed by a holy sword the size of a needle. Grabbing him by his tear-streaked face, she says she really does not want to part with him. Drops of blood fall to the floor. A small onion looks up, while Sonia and Edward smile at him and greet their son. Lying there, the boy tries to speak, but only makes sounds as he struggles to understand what is happening to him. The mother cradles Luke, rocking him, and the main character realizes he has become a baby, and that this is a rebirth. Remembering the girl grabbing his face and saying she was dying and did not want to leave him, the main character realizes she is dead, but he realizes she killed him at the same time, and the boy trembles and cries in his mother's arms. Memories of his parents and sister flash through his mind. Silently apologizing to them, he feels relieved he was able to protect them. Sonia, holding Luca, asks why he is crying. Beside him, Edward watches his son with concern. Sonia asks her son to smile, and Edward makes a funny face and silly noises to amuse him. Finally, the boy smiles and looks at his parents, realizing they love him very much. A voice returns in his head, speaking of a twisted soul, and his eyes turn black. Lucas begins striking his mother's face with his palms, causing her to strike back. The father, surprised, asks why he suddenly began fighting. The boy, wearing a malicious expression, recalls the demon's words. A demon girl's smile flashes into his mind, telling him that when Chris awakens, his memories will return. The protagonist realizes the curse is the urge to kill everyone he loves. The mother watches her son with worry and asks whether he is hungry. Edward snaps his finger with a smile and asks Luca to look at it. The boy's eyes return to normal as he looks at his father, who conjured the water and says the water is flying in the air and it's fun magic. Sonia feels relieved as she tells her husband he is doing well, and the boy wonders whether magic exists in this world. The main character realizes the demon girl's curse is a form of magic. Demons have magic that controls minds. Realizing he can use this to resist her curse, Edward stands with a sword by the demon's head and shouts for Luke to come to his senses as Luke clutches his head and his mother and two sisters run to him. The demon girl's head smiles and sticks out her tongue as she asks the boy if he remembered how close they were with her. Everyone gathers around the main character, who kneels and holds his head while dolls grip his back. Edward asks his son to hold on. The demon girl laughs. Calling him by his past life name, the girl says his emotions taste delicious, and the main character glares at her as he realizes he was cursed when they met. Little Luke lies in his crib with his eyes closed, doubting he can remove the curse on his own after trying so many things, and clenches his fists as he concentrates on the mana inside him. Suddenly, the boy opens his eyes and sees a view from the sky down to the ground, feeling connected to the world as if floating. A sense of being all-powerful as mana and the world's spirits fuse into one, and he thinks about disappearing to avoid hurting his loved ones. A vision of his father fighting wolves in the forest with a sword fills his mind, his hands scratched and the sword stained with blood. The main character recognizes his father but can't make sense of what is happening. Edward's face is wounded, even in one eye, and he shouts at them to keep their hands off his family. A black silhouette approaches Sonia, who is holding Arcia in her arms. Arcia is crying, and Sonia asks the figure not to come near. The protagonist realizes the child is his younger sister. The mother screams for Edward to save them. They both start crying, and he knows this is the future, where all his loved ones will be in danger, so he cannot die until he helps them. A boy lies in the crib with a calm face. He thinks about mana flowing through his body. His parents stand beside the child. Edward shouts the boy's name, and someone else stands behind them. Edward and Sonia look tense. Luca realizes this is his parents' mana, and that they are transferring their powers to him. The father holds the child's hand. Through his link to the world, the main character feels an unpleasant pull from the Pope's mana and realizes the contract magic binding the opponent is like a curse, seeping into his body and trying to overcome his own curse. His parents hold his hands, fight poison with poison. As it feeds on his mind and soul, the curse grows stronger. He remembers the demon saying a piece of her would always be with him. That is the last thing he remembers. Edward shuts his eyes and realizes nothing will work because his father's binding spell cannot displace the curse, and he once again remembers the demon's words that the curse feeds on the mind and soul. Knowing everything, the main character chooses to sacrifice his soul. His soul will disappear, but he can sacrifice his memories to strengthen the contract spell. He remembers how the demon killed him and her words that he would kill everyone he loves. The curse cannot be erased, but he can add a contract spell to it. Under the contract, he will not feel special emotions toward anyone except his family. The boy stands expressionless, lost in thought. Edward comforts Sonia, who is worried that their son is not smiling. The boy trains on a mannequin, his magic used only to protect his family, and Edward tells his son he must know the measure in everything. The boy is clutching his chest. If the curse activates, the contract will begin resisting it. He will die alone, far from everyone he loves. The protagonist stands with his eyes closed as magic gathers around him, and the curse and the contract fuse into something new. Luca realizes he will disappear, and a new he will protect his new mom and dad and his future sister. Edward stands happily holding his son. Sonia smiles beside him, and the Holy Father stands behind them smiling. This is how Luke was born. Luke's parents are crying with joy. Sonia kisses the newborn on the cheek. Standing before the demon's head, the boy draws worried looks from everyone. He says he remembers everything and that it is the demon's curse. The head confirms this. Smiling, the demon girl says she does not remember herself, but she feels a part of herself in him called Luca Sweetrue. The demon says she is overwhelmed by the main character's emotions. Edward grabs his sword and swings it. He screams angrily and accuses her of torturing his son. Edward swings his sword and throws it at the demon's head, striking it exactly and leaving the blade lodged there. The father calls his son by name. The boy still holds his head. The mother asks Luke if he is okay. A single doll lies nearby with the two girls. Breathing hard with his eyes closed, the main character's soul twists again and he opens his black eyes. The clay dolls immobilize the boy again, and he tells his family to stay away because he does not want to hurt them. Sonia starts crying. The father, frightened, looks at his son and tries to figure out what to do. Luke's cousin is crying too. Tearful Arch clenches her fists and says her brother is in pain and she does not want to do this. Holding his head, the main character silently apologizes to Archie for swearing to protect her and making her cry, then promises again that everything will be fine. Luca thinks about ending his life to stop hurting his whole family. The memory of striking the demon girl and the power that killed the demon in another world stays with him. He will forge a holy sword and pour all his mana into it. He embodies the gleaming holy sword. By piercing his own body with the sword, he will destroy both the boy and the curse. The protagonist fights the pain, thinking that even if he dies, his loved ones will not suffer. Looking at his worried family, he silently thanks them for loving him and loves them in return. Tearful, his younger sister stands before him and asks her brother not to do it. As the main character starts to say goodbye, the girl screams at the boy with all her strength that it shouldn't end. Luca hears his younger sister's voice in his head again, yelling that it's unnecessary, and he is furious because it's so loud. Luke remembers telling Arca not to disturb him while he slept. Arca looks at his older brother, realizes he will not be there, and begins to cry. Someone says Luca is in trouble and is coming now. The high elf asks you to trust him, though he will need a little help. The elf asks the main character to wait. The boy opens his eyes in surprise and tries to figure out whose voice it is. Roots suddenly rose from the ground, wrapped around the boy, and lifted him a little, and he screamed while the whole family stared at him. And the father wondered where the roots had come from. A voice from the side warns Luke that if he dies, all the fun will be lost. Luke and his family turn toward the voice, puzzled. Aliyah, the high elf, approaches them, closes one eye, and yawns, and says he knew there was something inside the boy, but did not think it was a demon's curse. Lifted into the air by the roots, the main character tells the elf that for this reason he must end everything. Aliyah steps forward, points at him, and asks Luca to wait because Luca does not want to lose a close friend. Pointing at Luke with a smile, he tells the main character the curse can be destroyed. Luke looks at him surprised. Mr. Aliyah approaches Luke and tells him that fortunately they have everything needed to destroy the curse. Everyone in Luke's family watches the elf's actions. Aliyah points to himself and says he is a high elf and the boy's family is there too. Many others turn to the elf and look surprised. The high elf steps up to little Archer, takes her hands, and says that among the many users there is one who can form a contract with the world tree. Smiling, Aliyah tells Archer her power can lift Luke's curse, and Archer looks at Luke in surprise and asks again about it. Edward turns to the high elf and asks what kind of contract with the world tree he is talking about and what it means in general. And Aliyah says that this child is always climbing the huge, sacred tree. A little girl holds a plush bunny. The high elf says she unconsciously draws on the tree's power to protect herself. I also want to protect my beloved brother. Luca stands holding an axe. The main character asks if Archer can feel his mana because of the sacred tree's power. Aliyah smiles and confirms this is true. Usually this requires the powers of the high elves, the rightful guardians of the world tree. Luke's parents look at him in shock as he says no one could have believed that a girl with such privileges would be born in such a remote village. Aliyah keeps holding Archie's hands and tells her she is the new keeper of the world tree. The girl looks at him in surprise. The high elf remembers the world tree and explains that a single world tree in the magical forest has been without a guardian for a long time. So with his help, the girl can sign a contract with it. Edward objects, telling Mr. Aliyah that Archia is only 2 years old. The high elf asks them to be quiet because the decision is Archia's. The girl hesitates, watching her brother trapped by tree roots and in pain. The girl begins to cry loudly, but then decides to save her brother.